Good evening, good folks, and welcome to the City of Muskegon City Commission work session for this Monday, July 10th. Can we have roll call, please?
Commissioner Emery,
Here.
Commissioner St. Clair,
Here.
Mayor Johnson,
Here.
Commissioner Hood, absent, Commissioner Ramsey,
Here.
Vice Mayor German, absent, Commissioner Gorman.
Here.
Thank you. All right, we got a few items under new business. Note for public comment that is reserved for the end of our work session meetings, unlike our general sessions where we do have multiple public comment periods, one at the beginning, one at the end, and sometimes multiple ones in the middle. But in the work session, our public comment period is reserved to the end of the meeting. You are welcome to give public comment. We have forms at the back of the room. We need to get forms at the back of the room.
They're on the table.
They're on the table? Okay,
Yeah.
they're on the table, not on the wall. Please complete the form, provide your name and address. Note I will not be sharing your home address publicly, nor will I ask you to share it publicly, but please indicate it on that form. And you'll have up to 3 minutes to provide remarks during public comment. And for folks watching at home or on live stream, phone number will be scrolling at the bottom of the screen if you're interested in phoning in your public comment. Also, we'll have up to 3 minutes to provide remarks. So first up, we have DWRF and CWSRF, and our DPW director is going to tell us what that stands for in just a minute. Dan Vanderheide, welcome.
Thank you, Mayor. Good evening, Mayor and Commissioners. I've got a little set of presentation materials here that I'm going to go through, I've got them pulled up here too on this computer. Yep, I do. So, as the Mayor said, this is for DWR. Oh, now I have them pulled up here. Deborah.
There you go.
Yeah.
DWRF and CWSRF. That is the program that we commonly know as the Revolving Fund or the State Revolving Fund. It is a program that the state offers to communities throughout the state to provide low-interest loans for water and sewer system improvements. It's a competitive process. The application process is long and involved. You may recall that just a few meetings ago, we had our consultant, Prina Newhoff, here. Barbara Marzak was here, and she presented new, escaping me right now, but our project plans for both water and sewer in two separate meetings. Those project plans were actually in preparation for next year's program. So that gives you an idea of how long we as staff and our consultant work to get these projects and programs put together. We're fortunate this year to have been selected by the state not only for our full program, but also offered very beneficial grants and principal forgiveness. That's kind of the highlight of the whole situation, so I'll say that off the bat. We're getting 50% principal forgiveness on our sewer improvements and 75% principal forgiveness on our water improvements. So you can think of that basically as a grant. It comes off of the loan that we go out and get through the program, and therefore get quite a bit of grants and aid from the state. We typically have, but we're pleased to get it again this year. So first, I think I failed to adequately describe those terms as the Mayor said, so just to clarify, they are the Drinking Water Revolving Fund and the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. I'm not sure why the state is included on the clean water side and not on the drinking water. That's a little confusing, but they're just the yin and the yang of the same program, water and sewer. First of all, I have to apologize. You have in front of you an updated copy of my cover sheet with some different numbers on it. Thankfully, both the Mayor and I recognized that my numbers were a little high, and so that's good news. So I'll get to that in a little bit. But starting at the top, you may recall the first time you saw these, again, were when the previous project plans were submitted back in June of 21. And then in October of last year, about 9 months ago, we were here asking for approval of the engineering contracts for these items. There's 4 projects that are included in the program, or proposed for inclusion in the program this year. They're listed there on the screen. We have one known as Wilcox-Thompson. It is area, and actually I'll skip ahead to my next page just because it shows the area. Oh. This is the area we're talking about. It's sort of the old portion of the Bluffton neighborhood, you might say. It includes Wilcox Avenue, Thompson Avenue, Edgewater Street, Cherry Street, Walnut Street, and an unnamed alley between. This is the largest project of the 4. I'm going to go back to my list. That contract came in at just over $4 million. The second largest is, well, I say the second largest, but I'm excluding the lead service lines because that's sort of a separate project. I'll get to that in a minute. Morton Avenue from Lincoln to Denmark. Again, replacing the water and sewer both on that project. There's a lift station repair project. That includes our Harbortown lift station and our Edgewater lift station. Mostly a replacement of the pumps at those stations. And then kind of a separate project, but included in the program is more lead service line replacements. Those lead service line replacements are targeted in certain areas. There's, without getting into real specifics, they're going to be on Apple Avenue in preparation for the state's reconstruction of that street in a few years. In some folks know as the Clay Hill area. It's part of the Campbell Field neighborhood, so in the Oakview neighborhood. That's about $4.5 million worth. As an aside on that contract, we actually received really favorable bids, and the state allowed us to increase the overall cost of that project from the original bid of about $3.1 million up to $4.5 million to take advantage of the full amount of loans they were offering to give us so that we could replace an additional 200 lead service lines. So as I mentioned, 50% principal forgiveness and 50% on the sewer side and 75% on the water. And all of that put together, based on the various splits between the 2 projects, or the 4 projects, almost $7.2 million that the state is going to cover for us. A good portion of that money comes from the bipartisan infrastructure law, and that flows through to the state, and the state grants that out. So our cost is just under $3.5 million. That cost then is what is the loan that we will sell with your authorization in about a month or a little more, and bond for that amount. One of the benefits of this program is that even on top of the amount that we are offered in principal forgiveness, the bond rates are extremely low, in this case 1.875%. So this is where we get to the new part of what we're doing here. Some of you at least recall that much of this has been done over the last few years. We've taken advantage of this program. But here is the new portion this year. So you'll recall at the previous meeting, we approved debt service fees for the water and sewer system. And the intent of those fees is to cover the debt that those systems incur each year. One of the benefits of the debt service fee as we see it is that as we come to you with large capital projects that are intended to be covered by debt, you can see exactly what those projects are going to cost our customers. So this is where my previous cover sheet had errors in it, and actually this updated version still has a couple small errors in it. So the previous, if you happen to be looking at a version of this that has a total monthly fee of $9.50 or so, that is the incorrect version. this $1.05 total is the correct version. The totals under the water and sewer columns were not updated. My apologies for that. All of the other numbers on this chart are now correct. So, what that means is a customer that is on our water and sewer system, when the bonds associated with this project begin to fully impact the systems, and I'll show you what I mean by that more specifically a little later, but when we sell the bond, it usually takes about 2 years for the cost associated with those bonds to start to hit our system finances. So in about 2 years, our customers will see $1.05 increase in their debt service fee associated with these projects if you all approve them. That will be a monthly fee. It's shown, it will be shown, it has not yet appeared. The first time our residents see it will be bill they receive in August for their July water and sewer. The fee that they see this coming August will be for projects in the past. So I'm going to go down past a few other things so that I can describe this and show you what I'm talking about. So you'll see on this chart the years on the left-hand side, and you'll see kind of as we go across to the right the various projects that we have approved over the years under the SRF programs. So these are the bonded projects that have been performed and bonded by the system, and that the system is paying debt for. The shaded gray area above the dark black line is in the past, and we did not actually implement the debt service fee at that time. It was part of the reason that the water fund, as you know, sits in a negative position is partly because these debt service fee or these debts were being covered by the commodity rate, and the commodity rate was struggling to do so. So in fiscal year 2024, which is the one we just entered, and the first line on this chart that is not grayed out, you'll see that our total debt service fee we expect would be $9.76. That's takes into account this project as it's before you tonight, as well as the projects in the past. And so you can see the very first time we took advantage of the program was in 2004 for the filtration plant expansion. And you can see that back in 2006 is when that started to really hit the system finances, and we expect it will run out, or we will have paid the bond off in 2026. And so you can see as you work down the column, that project falls off in 2026 and is no longer impacting the total debt service fee that our customers will see starting in that year. Projects that some of you may be familiar with, the Beidler and Leahy projects, Peck and Amity, Sanford, and the lead service line replacements that we are sold the bond on last year, which are in the East Marshfield neighborhood. Those projects, you can see if we had been charging the debt service fee at that time, what those projects would have had an impact on that fee. And then 2024, we've added these projects. In 2024, the last project column, the 2024 lead service line replacement, just before the total there on the right, is a project that we anticipate coming to you about next year. We're still unsure, projecting forward, how this program is going to go for us. You may recall last time I mentioned that the sanitary sewer scoring has changed drastically, and so we're not as confident as we used to be that we're going to score well under that program. In which case we'll be looking for projects that are water fund only, because we expect we will still continue to score well there. And our greatest need on the water side that isn't sort of in a street that also has sewer is lead service line replacements. And so we've anticipated that may be the best use of the funds for next year. So I've forecasted that column out. It's important, as you see, these are estimated fees. As we receive our audited financial numbers, that's what sets that debt service fee going forward. So these are estimates, but I wanted you to see kind of how that debt service fee builds up over time. In particular, as we've started to take advantage of the program again in the last few years. You can see in 2027, between 2026 and 27, when that filtration plant bond falls off, there's a large decrease in the projected fee. Again, that may be offset by future projects that you all would approve. But as of today, that is what we estimate the debt service fee will look like from year to year. So, before you, tomorrow night, will be approval of these projects, which would entail that $1.05 increase to the debt service fee on the bill. We wanted to just kind of go through briefly why these projects were selected. I've got some examples from the Wilcox and Thompson neighborhood, just so we can kind of talk through why this area is receiving a large investment. The same is true for Morton. The same is true for the lift station projects. They're all system needs, older parts of the system that need these upgrades. So this map shows the results of the sewer televising that we did. We sent cameras throughout the neighborhood and see various colors, obviously red being the worst sections, orange being bad sections, yellow being, I guess we'll call it medium sections. However, Prina Newhoff, our consultant who did this for us, noted that although a couple of these pipes are yellow, those happen to be pipes that are fully collapsed. They just weren't able to televise them, and under the scoring system, that means they can't identify what their specific defects are. But the fact is the pipe has collapsed, and so they weren't able to televise it. And obviously a collapsed pipe is about as bad as you can get. So these are some pictures from what they found. That's what our sewers, for example, look like. That one in the upper left is a big wad of roots that is almost blocking the pipe. The one in the lower left is joint offset. So as the pipes are laid together, you get two pipes that are not laid, I guess, with the full circle going down the middle. And so you can see, what you see there is actually soil working its way into the sanitary sewer system. And the consultant pointed out that if that were a video, if I had a video for you tonight, you'd actually see that soil dripping into the pipe. It's actively. A couple of the other pictures there, you can see that upper right is roots coming in from a service line, coming in at the T there, as well as a crushed joint with those cracks there. And then that bottom right picture, again, you can see roots kind of coming in joint. And you can see further joint problems down the line with offset pipes. That's what those white semicircles are. You're seeing the edge of the pipe instead of right down the middle of it. So those joints are offset from each other. So just some examples of, why is this project necessary? Why is that $1.05 charge worth putting onto our customers? Well, as you know, most of our system is over 100 years old, especially the Wilcox and Thompson neighborhood. And these are the kinds of things that we see when we go down and camera them. In many parts of our system, excuse me, these pictures are very common. So I say that to advocate not only for these contracts and these projects, but to show you that this is not something in isolation that we can simply fix this year and say, okay, we've done it, we're going to walk away. There are many portions of our system that look just like this, or perhaps even worse. So it's a problem that we need to confront. We're very fortunate to have these programs from the state to help us do that. Just a note on the mechanics of approval. So this item tonight is really just for your information, allows me to give you more information about what these contracts and projects and programs are and have a little bit more of a dialogue about it. The actual approval of each of the 4 contracts will be on tomorrow's agenda. So each contract will be listed as a separate item, and we'll award the contract in each case to the city's recommended contractor. So after that long-winded explanation, we have.
Thank you, Director Van Hyde. I think we can see from those photos another reason why we had such seepage issues a few years ago with groundwater. So not only is this investment going to necessary just by conditions of the system over there, long overdue, but also the fact that this will help protect us from additional costs in the future because the waters will likely rise again. And so if we have a system that is not subject to so much seepage, we won't have to pay for all of that going to the wastewater treatment facility. So that will be a cost saving long term. So I do have some questions, but I'll reserve my questions and open up the commission right now. Commissioners? Commissioner Ramsey.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Director Vanderheid, if you could go back to your payment schedule. So I want to thank you for clarifying the dollar and some change, $5 that will be added to the fee schedule for this particular project. But I also want to make sure, if I understand it correctly, that our neighbors also understand that the total that they will see in their debt service fee will be $976, not just the $5. So even though the numbers are less, that there are all of these things that we're currently covering, and as they drop off, that number will fluctuate. Next year it jumps up by $2.50 nearly, but then it does begin to come down. And so I just want to make sure that people at home don't look for $5, see $976, and then burn your building down, because I would, right? So great job at explaining that. Thank you so much. And again, I would encourage you to make sure that there is a dedicated communication line for people that have questions about this when it first hits. Just because I feel like even though the staff is doing such a great job, not everyone is going to watch this meeting, and I think that there are going to be a lot of questions. So anything that you can do to arm not only myself and my colleagues, but anyone else in the building would be great.
Yes, and that's a good segue, I guess, for me to say that we're going to have the communications department is working with us to create a website that will be available to explain all of this information. That website will be in a link on the water bill. It won't be a clickable link on a paper bill, but it will be short enough that you'll be able to easily enter it into your phone or your computer, whatever, and go to that webpage to learn all about the debt service fee. And of course, the number and other contact means will be there.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dan. This looks great.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramsey. Any other questions, commissioners? Commissioner Emery?
Yeah. What is and if we say yes to this, what is the anticipated start date in Bluffton?
Sure. So this winter we'll be having, or this fall I should say probably, we'll be meeting with each one of the impacted parts of town, including the Bluffton neighborhood as well as Morton, and the areas with the lead service lines. We'll be explaining the projects to them and the schedules. The portion in Bluffton next year will be all year. I mean, it will be from the beginning to the end because it's a large and complex project.
Thank you.
They will come out of it with brand new streets, brand new
Yes.
water main, and brand new sanitary sewer. Mostly new storm sewer as well. So
They are looking forward to that.
Excellent. Any follow-up, Commissioner Emery?
No, good.
Question? Commissioner Gorman? Any question? All right. How many billing units altogether, that are going to be charged these fees? And we're going to be doing a differing fee for residential versus some of the non-residential, but this is the residential fee that we see here.
correct. Yes, the fees are what we call meter equivalency based. So a residential customer will pay approximately that $1.05. Homes and businesses that have larger meters than a standard meter, which is usually 5/8 or 3/4 of an inch. If you have a larger meter than that, you'll pay a fee increased such that matches your meter size. So if you have a 2-inch meter, it's not exactly a factor of 2. It's, I think, more like a factor of 6. But just as an example, a 2-inch meter is a common commercial building meter. So commercial account could expect perhaps to pay something like 6 times that, so $6.30 per month.
And how many residential units are we estimating approximately? I thought I read somewhere, I can't find it now, but the other day, 13,000
Yeah.
thereabouts.
So we have 13,000 metered accounts, excluding irrigation accounts. The number of charges, or the number of equivalent accounts, is about 16,500. So the difference between those two numbers is the number of equivalent fees that will be added to the larger meters. Good explanation, but
So we have approximately 16,500 metered accounts altogether. Roughly 13,000 are the residential, your standard residential, and then the other 3,500 approximately are those 2-inch metered. Am I understanding that correctly?
actually, so I must have explained that poorly. So we have about 11,000 residential accounts,
11,000.
13,000 overall,
Okay.
and the meter equivalency factor method expands the number of charges we're going to issue, essentially from 13,000 up to 16,500. So that gives you a sense for how much the larger water meter users, commercial industrial accounts, are shouldering, of that charge.
Okay. So that equalizes it essentially with that 16,500 number.
You could think of it as about 11,000 residential units, we'll say, right? And so that would leave about 5,500 commercial and industrial units. That's not the number of accounts we have, but those are the number of charges on an equivalent basis that will be spread out. So something like 1/3 will go toward commercial and industrial users, and 2/3 goes to the residential.
Equalized per unit basis. Okay.
And we'll break all of this information out on that website for anyone
Okay.
read into the details.
Excellent. Yes. Some folks like the nitty gritty. So meanwhile, we see a lead service line project specifically, and then we're continuing to charge the $5 a month that we have been charging for the past few years for lead service line replacements. We are continuously looking for additional resources from the state and the feds, though, to do more lead service lines, because our expectation was within 20 years. I think when we set out, we were targeting 20 years to replace all of our lead service lines, which is a huge number. So we're not resting on this program alone to pay for our lead service lines going forward, that we're going to be exhausting all options to identify state and federal resources to lessen the need to issue debt and charge our residents.
Yes, absolutely. The $5 or the lead service line fee that's on the bill goes to pay for the service lines that our internal staff replace, and it has also been supplementing these programs by paying for the private side of these. This program has stringent requirements that make it more financially advantageous to pay for the private side with our own funds, and only the public side of each lead water service in this program. $5 fee lets us pay for the private side out of those system funds. Any that are remaining help shore up our internal lead service line replacements efforts.
Okay. And maybe you're going to add the clarification that I was just
Okay,
going to. Go ahead.
Was it about the private side?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, we'll go for it.
No, go ahead,
Okay.
city manager, chime in.
So the private sideline that's a mandate from the state on how the replacement works, which is in most cases the private sideline would be paid for by the resident, but because of the state mandate, we have to pay for the private side as well.
Thank you for the additional clarifying
Mike.
context. All right, and then it's still up here. Good. So, looks like we're planning on doing a debt service, or at least what's been proposed is a debt service fee for all past issued debt. I guess that was not clear to me in our past discussions. I had the expectation or anticipation that we'd be charging debt service fees going forward, as we're issuing debt for these projects, not doing a new fee to cover past debt issued. So if we're going to go this route, and I'm not necessarily, opposed, but I'm just wondering if we're going to go this route, are we going to be seeing a reduction in our commodity rate then? Because when we set out to issue this debt, we had commodity rates set accordingly to cover the cost for this debt. So if we're going to do a debt service fee for past debt, are we going to then see, a relatively commensurate reduction in the commodity rate for our end users?
Unfortunately, no, is the short answer. You'll recall that the water fund at the end of this past June 30, 2023, we estimate, because we don't have audited numbers yet, but we estimate that it's about $2 million in the hole. So the debt service fee allows us to increase the commodity rate less than we would otherwise have to. And we expect that by the end of this year, we'll be in a deficit elimination plan with the water fund.
With the water fund. Commissioner Ramsey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Dan, we're going to have to get into the nitty gritty of this because the mayor has made a great point. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And I do not like your answer.
Okay?
Not your fault, I understand. So we're going to say that everything for FY24, which started effectively 9 days ago, is looking at the $5 and or dollar and something that is shared on these new updated numbers, right? So then everything previous that, literally everything from 2023 backward to 2004 is all previous debt. And we are covering that debt by an increase in our commodities on the bill itself. But even though we are going to redirect that number to this new debt service fee, we're not going to see a decrease in our commodity rate because of $2.5 million deficit. So then aren't we paying twice? I mean, and I just want you to hear how it sounds. We're still going to be charging the higher commodity rate, but it won't be, but it's not going to jump up by 8% or whatever that looks like. And we're going to charge the debt service fees. So those are two different places that money are coming into the same $2.5 million debt, except for the $5 for FY24. So my question is, how do we make that more digestible and understandable? Is it by building out the 2.5 in a separate sheet so we can see what that looks like or how that price breakdown goes? But something that's more accessible, because that to me literally sounds like we're paying the same bill twice.
Sure, we can include some graphics on that website to help folks understand that. But
How about help me
Sure.
understand it, Dan?
verbally,
Folks are great, but I'm confused.
verbally, what I can say tonight is that, let's say our commodity rate was $5, right? We're just talking in general numbers here, so
Yes,
I
any
can
number.
give some examples. Let's say $3 of that was going to pay system debt, and $2 of it was going toward operations. By putting the debt service fee in place, that whole $5 commodity rate can now go towards operations and building cash, right? Replacing or making up for that $2.5 million hole. Because the debt service fee has taken that responsibility on. So the commodity rate prior to the big black line in this chart and in the gray area was paying for the system debt at that time. But we now know it wasn't really able to because we're $2 million in the hole. And so we've taken that responsibility away from the commodity rate, put it on the debt service fee, and that allows us to build cash and, based on our projections, be in a positive state 4 or so fiscal years from now.
For 4 or so? So FOR, FOUR or so.
In about 4 fiscal years, FOUR.
So we wouldn't need to raise the commodity rate for
Mm.
for See? Now we're going to circle back because you had me for a second, Dan. I was in your corner. It sounded like we weren't going to raise our commodity rate because we were going to have that kind of building up an egg of, and so we were going to be in the positive moving forward.
Nope.
So then, where do we? And maybe this is a question for Mr. Mayor because we fought this. What does it go up averagely a year? And how is this money going to be allocated to that? And I'm not saying that I don't believe you, Dan. Please know that. Mm-hmm. I'm not calling this wonky or anything, but it's got to be digestible, and it is not. So if we're going to be saving these $3 of $5 is now going to go to commodity or usage or operation or whatever you called it, and not the debt, then we've got to be cool for a minute. There's got to be a padding there. And if not, then are you telling me that our commodity rate grows so exponentially every year that we are already going to be in debt for FY25? even with the absorption of the $3 because of the debt service fee? And if so, then we don't have an answer. This is not the correct answer then, because we're still going to be running at a major deficit. I see your hand, Mr. Manager, but I want to get these words out of my mouth. Because if that's the case, this is not the answer. Because it doesn't do anything but change the amount of debt as to where and for how long. So how do we get into a space where we're not constantly making up for time that we've lost? Not that that's not necessary in the beginning, because I realize that it is. But what's the long-term answer? Because then this is not it. Hit it.
Thank you, Mr. Ramsey. Mr. Manager.
So I think to answer the last part of your question first, this starts us down that road to correct or to be able to separate that out more to plan better for the future. So by having the debt service cost, so as we incur debt onto the system and knowing exactly what that will do to the rate and being able to have this conversation of these projects like we're doing tonight allows us to plan that going forward and then commit the commodity rate for what it actually costs to treat and deliver the water to the resident as a separate rate. We can actually see those two separately. And by having the debt service as a separate number, it's just a little more transparent. If we had not instituted the debt service fee, and I can't remember when we first discussed it, February or March, there were two options on the table. It was a 10%. Was that?
Well, if it were going to be in 1 year, it would have been a 45% increase in the commodity.
So we were gonna, so it would have been 10%, and we were over multiple years is what we were looking at presenting, or a debt service fee. And so the conversation came back to the debt service fee because the rationale being as the debt was paid off, the debt service fee, as Dan has laid out on this table, would fall off as the debt is paid off. If it goes into the commodity rate, then you have to make those adjustments every year back and forth. So this is an avenue that many communities use to be more transparent on how the total bill that you're paying is being broken down between the cost that it actually takes to treat and distribute the water, and then the cost of the debt on the system. And so this will start to build us out of that hole. So at the end of this coming fiscal year, we're projecting, so right now, like Dan said, we're projecting that this year we're going to start about $2.5 million in the hole with this debt service fee. I think we're going to end the year maybe 200 in the hole. Is that what we're thinking? Or
No, we'll still, I don't have the numbers in front of me,
Okay.
but we'll still be about,
About
1.2
1.2 million
in the hole.
Okay. And then we'll start to build. We'll start to fill that hole in, and then over a number of years, then we'll be out of that hole, and then we'll start to build our reserve. And the reserve is generally supposed to be 20 to 25%, or
6 months worth of expenses.
Okay, so 50%. So that and that reserve is at the discretion of the commission. That's the water association's recommendation for where that should be. So if we had not either implemented, if we had not implemented a more steep commodity rate, which we did not increase the commodity rate this year,
Right.
we would have continued to dig further into the hole over time, and we would have gotten to a situation where it would have been a deficit elimination plan with the state. So
Mr. Mayor, if I could follow up, please?
Certainly.
So, John, Mr. Manager, thank you so much for that. I think that that's great. There are a lot of things that we're speaking about that aren't included in this report or in a fee schedule like this, like for instance, the 2.5 million and what our annual percent or our annual percent that we raise the commodity rate is. And while I love transparency, transparency doesn't create a system of accountability, and this process could still be ill-effective at best. And so while I'm not saying that is what this is, we've got to show the neighbors and me how this works. So you did a great job with this fee schedule, Dan. Where's the one that talks about the commodity rate, how it raises, how we're going to actually address the 2.5 million, like something very much like this so that it's digestible? Because now I see that it's not. But is this the right way to go? And if so, are we doing it correctly? Is there an opportunity for us to ask for more? Should we literally look at raising the water bill more? Which I would rather bite off my tongue than say, but it doesn't sound like It sounds like it's too long. It sounds like it's too long of a process, and I don't know what else to do. But I think that if we're going to retrofit the whole thing, we might as well work forward from a place where we can begin to win. And if we're looking at doing all of this work now, why not at least have that conversation? Or so that our neighbors understand brass tacks, what a water bill looks like, and that they're only paying so much of it. And this is why. This is why it goes up 8% every year, whatever that number was.
We, and I believe you may have been absent at the work session, we did have that,
Shade.
or attempted to have that conversation. And that's, you know, really exactly what we're attempting to do. So as a part of that work session discussion, we talked about that we worked with municipal finance consultants, Warren Kramer. He developed a 5-year forward-looking revenue and expense projection, I guess you'd call it. And that spreadsheet then determines how much revenue the water fund needs to raise in addition in order to cover its expenses each year. And while we aren't recommending any commodity rate increases specifically right now, after we see the real impact of the debt service fee, when we come and have the budget discussion next March, we will have the new version of that forward-looking spreadsheet, and we will say, okay, we're now projected to be out of debt in this fiscal year, and we could raise the commodity rate this much to make that sooner, or we could reduce it this much to make it later, subject to a deficit elimination plan by the state if we're under one. But that is the genesis of kind of this whole process, was rather than looking back, which is how we had done it in the past, we'd hired a consultant to look at our past expenses and estimate, you know, over the next 5 years, you should raise your rate, I think it was 4% per year, every year. And we didn't, in the meantime, have any way of seeing what the impact of those raises were. And turns out what that consultant recommended was insufficient. At the time, perhaps they felt it was great, right? But they didn't anticipate the inflation and the pandemic and all the other things that happened. So this is our attempt to have that forward-looking projection rather than a rearward-looking study, so to speak, that will each year allow us to say, okay, here's when we expect to be in a better position, and here's how we recommend we get there.
I think that that's a great answer. Unfortunately, I'm unsatisfied with it. Is there this study that you're talking about from the work session that I was not at, Dan, is there something that I can look on paper and see that? Is there a way for us to attach it to this so that we have this for the debt fee schedule, but then we're also looking at that before? And I realize it will be updated in March, but that does me no good now, because I want to know what the plan is, just like this, and what it looks like potentially estimated every year moving forward, so that we can see when and how those numbers truly impact the commodity rate, when it will be raised, when we're looking at what and how.
Yeah, it sounds to me like you're looking for a digestible version of that spreadsheet, and I can work to create that. And I will also get you the presentation materials from that work session.
Thank you, Dan. Sorry.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramsey. And you're not off the hook. You were at that work session.
Oh, was I there?
It was? Oh.
Oh, this is defamation of character. I won't have it.
So thank you for more of that context and historical background. We did, back in 2016, there was a rate study done that forecast we needed to do 4% every single year going, like, for the foreseeable future, every single year for the water rate. And we also had, I think it was 5% for sewer every single year. As we know, Commissioner Ramsey, a few years ago, that had to be raised 8%, then 20% the same year,
and that's why
28%.
this is so important.
And we did
to
fight
me.
back and push back on that.
Right?
That was
Because
a huge jump.
We had to fight 6 other people. I mean, it was real. And so I just want to know that now we didn't say one thing, and now we're doing something that's still not enough. We've made some other mistakes once or twice up here, and I want to make sure that if we're going to do all this work around this one, that it's not another mistake. So this is not about you. But if we're going to do it, let's do it.
I agree.
So, we have been doing that 4% every single year since that study was done. We've done a more recent study, which has gotten us to here. How do we go forward? And so that's what staff is endeavoring to do with these proposals. We have had multiple discussions around this as how do we fund these capital improvements that are much needed. We can't ignore them.
No.
And so this is where the commission consensus was to have these debt service fees, which I still support. Struggle a bit with the past debt and being charged as a new fee. I appreciate we're not raising the commodity rates this year, so we're taking a break. I had hoped, though, that we were able to reduce the sewer rate, because that was that one that had went up 28% in 1 year. I think that was 2020
High water levels,
or
yeah.
2021. And I was hoping, I think it was 2020, I was hoping we'd be able to get in a position that we could, dial that back. We have gotten out of the deficit for our sewer fund. We're in positive territory, but we still need to collect additional revenue to get us to that 6-month mark of having cash reserve. So we're not there yet. We've paused. I appreciate that. We've paused on the commodity rate increase, but we're not necessarily in a good enough position to dial back that rate. Is that, on that question of the sewer rate alone, is that our expectation? That we're going to be in a position that we can look at dialing back that rate within reason? Because we're shifting this cost to this debt service fees that we will not need to charge as much with the commodity rate. Although our commodity rates are really competitive relative to other municipalities across the state and certainly outside of our state. But certainly would like to provide some financial relief wherever we can for our residents and our end users of our water and sewer system.
As the manager alluded to, in the sewer fund, we're in a cash positive situation and our revenue is covering our expenses. So it really comes down to how quickly the commission wants to reach that 6 months recommended expense of reserve, if at all. We as staff would advocate for that, but some folks might struggle to see $5 million sitting in the sewer fund, for a quote unquote rainy day, right? So we can have that discussion again, certainly in March. And if there's, we can see, that's one of the things I really appreciate about this new method is we can see exactly if you all desire to reduce the sewer commodity rate by 5%, what impact that has on how quickly we build cash and to what extent. We can certainly have that discussion. I will say that, staff's recommendation at this point would probably be to keep it the same, but that's really just to achieve that 6 months worth of expenses in reserve in a quote unquote reasonable time frame.
Just a moment, Commissioner Ramsey. When we had to do that significant increase to the sewer rate a few years ago, our water fund was in a much better situation. That was cash positive, and it was in a much stronger position. So we didn't need to have these huge increases. We could stick to that methodical 4% year over year increases. So can you help give us understanding or context how we got to the position that we are now in the water fund, that it has such a significant deficit that we need to be clawing our way out of? Like you mentioned inflation, you mentioned the pandemic. Are those the primary reasons? Were there surprise emergency capital improvement or repairs that caused us to dip into our cash, deplete that, and run a deficit in there? Can you just give us some more context or understanding as to how our water fund got it? And you may have very well explained this back at that March work session, but to bring it back top of mind for us today as we're moving forward and our community understands why we're looking at such a significant monthly increase on our water and sewer bills.
Sure. I can only really speak in generalities because I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I would say it's probably 4 things. Pandemic and its overtime impact on our staff. The current union contract at DPW, which gave our staff a much needed raise in their wages. Inflation, as it impacts our materials, our supplies, our external labor, things like that. And then the debt, frankly, that we signed up for over the course of 2019, 2020, and 2020. For example, you can see right on this chart, between 2021 and 2023, that debt service fee went up over $4, and that did not happen the commodity rate.
And most of this new fee is on the water side, particularly due to that 2004 filtration plant investment and 50 cents. So like, we're not even in a position, we don't have the luxury, unlike on the sanitation side, we might have the luxury of saying, well, we don't want to, because we have cash flow and we could maybe adjust it or tweak it. But the water side, we don't really. I mean, given that we have that significant deficit, that can't be ignored, and the state's going to require us to do a deficit elimination plan regardless, and we have to show how we're going to do it, and here's the plan how to do it. Doesn't mean we have to love it, nor necessarily celebrate it. I think going forward, perhaps we can celebrate the fact that we're coming up with a reasonable, methodical investment plan to take care of our capital needs over the long term, and do so in a more transparent way. But yeah, I don't really see any choice, particularly on the water side. And that water is making up. Yeah, almost 2/3 of that. So, it is what it is, even if it may be an enviable position to be in. But as Commissioner Ramsey has often emphasized, it's important that we are able to communicate this in a way that's digestible and understandable for our community and all end users of our sewer and water system. So I'm happy to know that we're going to be having, a dedicated page on our website explaining this. You said we're in a previous meeting. You also indicated that we're going to be putting something in the water and sewer bills to help people understand this new charge and where they can get more information from it as well. Okay. Commissioners, any other questions on this item? Or
One
the
statement.
4 related items that are on our agenda tomorrow?
Any estimated timelines, Dan, that you can get out to us by tomorrow? Like how long it would take for us with the new debt fee schedule, and how water's going to begin to take care of itself so that sanitation looks different. How long would it take for us to get that rainy day fund up to $5 million? And of course, everything estimated. But if you can put a timeline on something so that it's tangible, neighbors, including myself, will tend not to make the worst of a situation, and it makes it so that we can see that even though it's $5 million, that's a lot of money in my house, but not in the city of Muskegon. That's a very different thing. And so anything that looks like estimated timelines or this wonderful fee schedule that you put together that we can share is amazing.
Yeah, I'll talk with the manager and communications. We'll try to get a quickly yet comprehensible version of that forecast to you all at least, so you can understand what we're looking at.
Okay. Yeah.
I have
That'd
a
be
question.
appreciated. Yes, Commissioner Gorman.
Real quick. Legal review was not checked on this. I just wondered if it was reviewed by legal. Does it need to be reviewed by legal?
My apologies. So this is recommending contracts. This is a discussion item relative to contract award on tomorrow night's agenda.
Okay.
The contracts we're awarding tomorrow night are of a standard form that Prine and Newhoff has prepared and we've used for each of these previous years worth of this program. I will double check with the attorney, but I'm confident that it's the same form.
Just want to
Will be.
make sure. I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for calling it up.
Thank you, Commissioner Gorman. Any other questions or comments at this time? Something was on the top of my head and just...
And just to reset a little bit on the item,
Mhm.
the chart in front of you is the critical piece relative to, awarding these contracts tomorrow evening. And wish that we had the time to delay and talk more about it. However, the state's program rules require that we award these contracts at this particular meeting so that we can meet their schedule to sell the bond on time too.
Okay. So the contracts are on tomorrow's agenda for the debt service fee with regard to the past. Was that on our last agenda?
The debt service?
Yeah, for the past one.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Curious about resources to help folks that might be financially challenged. I mean, this seeing a $9 to $10 increase on a monthly basis. That's for some people it's easily absorbed. Other people it's a difficulty, particularly folks on a fixed income. So, are we going to be helping people to be aware of what resources may be available that they can access to help defray the costs, or if they're unable to pay their water and sewer bills? Are we connected with True North where they can help with water and sewer? I know that they do, gas and electric, but I don't know about sewer and water. Do they provide services for this, and we can help point people in that direction or other resources? I welcome any commissioners to input on resources that may be available to help inform staff how we can then relay that information.
Right. So I would love to spend some time or have a chat with Sarah. When we first experienced all of our COVID funding that came out, Sarah was an integral part of the partnership between city residents and those resources for water. I know that there are some recent developments, and I know that the state of Michigan will be doing some water bill assistance through the end of the year, and it's being handled by 2 agencies here in town. And so I would love to just provide that to Sarah, have her connect with those agencies specifically, and then also work with our partners at Call 211 to set up a pipeline so that when someone calls about water specifically, they have some they're such an awesome team over there that they can just flag something so that it comes up and says, if this is what you're calling about, this is who you call. So it becomes very, very easy for our neighbors. But absolutely, I would love that. The opportunity to... There she is!
Okay,
Huh?
our treasurer is there.
Yes. Oh, what did I say? I meant her.
Treasurer.
We'll chat about it, Sarah, if you need some communication beef up.
We have been handing out that information. I think we have over 100 people right now receiving assistance through the LIWEP program. Plus, we've been receiving a lot from the My Half program. So the information, we are making sure we get it out there to anyone that's having assistance. We have flyers, anyone that calls. So we are definitely doing our best to get it out there. So
I told you she was good.
I was just in my office working, so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah.
All right. Unless there's any other final questions or thoughts, we're going to move on to the next thing. Thank you, Director Van Hyde. Next up, we have the Muskegon Social Equity Program and our planning manager, Mike Franzik. Welcome, welcome.
Good evening.
Good evening.
We're here today to request to set how we are going to spend the MSEP funds for this year. We had previously discussed and agreed upon at a previous work session to allocate 30% of this year's $622,000 towards the MSEP, and we decided to keep 40% towards the grants and loans, which are working out great. There's a lot of activity there. To keep 30% towards the education and outreach, and since we have expungement clinics scheduled all the way through the first quarter of next year, we're proposing to do something else with that money and revisit that again come next year. And what we would like to do with the funds, the 30% of those funds this year, is to do some neighborhood improvements. And what we would like to do, we have a new grant coming out through the CNS department from the Fair Housing Settlement, and there will be grants for different neighborhoods, the 4 neighborhoods that I believe that were affected through that settlement. We would like to contribute an extra $10,000 towards those grants. And with the remaining about $56,000, we would like to do infrastructure improvements around these neighborhoods in the marijuana district. These improvements can include such things as alley paving, tree trimming, street sign replacement, sidewalk improvements, and things like that. And what we would do is have the Public Works Department improve these things, and then they would bill out of this fund.
What was that last part? I'm sorry.
So we'd have our Public Works Department carry out and execute these works, and they would bill out of this fund.
Okay. Can you expound on the neighborhood improvements, what you want to do with the 30% neighborhood improvements, how that works in concert with the Fair Housing Settlement grants? And do you have any supporting documents or related documents on this? It was not in our packet, so it wasn't.
Yeah, I don't. We're still putting together the grant, so we don't have that information yet. But that information will be released soon, I believe.
Okay. How do you anticipate using the 30%? I know you heard neighborhood improvements, but like how? I guess I'm just unclear. Like how?
Sure. So there's many different things that you'll see throughout the neighborhoods, whether it's stop signs that need replacement, street signs, cracked sidewalks or that are uneven. There's a lot of alleys that need paving in many of these neighborhoods. We have a lot of alley use, but they're very poorly paved. So we want to target things like this and, around the neighborhoods that have the cannabis stores.
Okay, so it's general public works projects in the vicinity of our cannabis operators.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, now I understand that. Thank you. I'm sorry if you explained it the first time.
That's fine.
Did not go through one here. Commissioner Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think that this sounds like a great opportunity, but I would really like to make sure that as we're spending these dollars, that they're impactful. And so the most impactful thing of the list that you just read off to me was paved alleys, because we all know that a lot of these alleys are in poor condition, especially after a winter of grading and snow and things like that. So anything that looks bigger and more impactful like that in these areas would be great. And it doesn't necessarily, for me, it doesn't have to be in the cannabis areas, even though they are all in my ward. I support that. Do it. The majority of them are in my ward. But, is there a way for us to have bigger impacts instead of cracked sidewalks and other things that might just be the everyday work of DPW or Public Works?
Yeah.
So, the sky's the limit. I'm encouraging you to look at all those wonderful things, or something that you've always wanted to see done, or that neighbors, because you've been so in the community lately. Michael, great job.
I do think the alley paving is the number one on our list.
People are going to love that.
Yeah. So we'd like to probably target which ones are being used the most and are in the worst conditions.
Absolutely.
And kind of assess it off of that.
Amazing. Yeah. Stuff like that sounds super cool to me. Stop signs. But, yeah.
We're good at replacing those anyways, but
Yeah. Just give it to him, man. He don't got nothing to do. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Yeah, I think it was 53.
Any thoughts, questions?
All good.
Commissioner Emmerich, Commissioner Gorman, Commissioner St. Clair, Commissioner Rams, any follow-up?
Nope.
Okay. So what are you looking for next steps then?
just kind of a nod that this is how we should spend this rest 30% over the next year, and then before June of next year when we get our next allocation, we'll come in that quarter and discuss how we want to use this 30% in the future, whether we want to carry this on or if we still see a need for more expungements. The expungement clinic, the first one we had, went great. We're still waiting on the final numbers for those, but we served over 50 people. There was an issue where we had a lot of people who came that did not pre-register, and unfortunately the state system went down that day. So we got everybody's contact information, and they're actually talking about holding another one for free just to follow up with those applicants, because there's about another 50 looking. So before we even have that next one, we're looking at probably serving over 100 people. So it's still needed.
Yeah. But I think that, as reflected in your proposal here, that it is sensible to not allocate additional resources for this bucket of money, because we have our expungement clinics fully funded through year end, and we'll be getting another allotment come spring, and so we can look at allocating resources from that. So I think your proposal is prudent, and I like the idea of allocating some of these resources back into the neighborhoods for general improvements of those neighborhoods specifically that have been most impacted by these cannabis operations. So I do like that and think it's sensible. So I appreciate you bringing that forward to us.
Thank you.
I think we are generally supportive.
All right. Then we will get to work.
All right. Thank you.
Yep, thanks.
Next up, update short-term rentals. Our city manager and our community engagement manager.
Yes. So tonight is a work session item just to kind of update the commission and to provide you with the opportunity to ask staff some questions on where things stand with short-term rental. So a quick overview. Back in May, we had the short-term rental open house where we had folks in the community basically come give us feedback, ask some questions. We had presentation from the MML, and from staff as well. So tonight, Deborah, as well as a number of other staff members, are going to tag team on giving this update related to some of the questions that we've gotten, some of the additional information that we've received, and where things stand for the summer, on receiving additional feedback on on what people are seeing in the neighborhoods related to short-term rental. So where we kind of left things at the public engagement was that we were going to use this summer to gather information to develop a plan going forward to put in some new policy. What we've discovered through this process is that the policies that we have in place, staff, whether it's in the building department or planning or public safety, we're following the regulations that we currently have in place and doing a good job of that. It's where do we need to make those adjustments so that the tools are there to do the job the way that the commission and the community thinks that we need to do that. So I'm going to turn it over to Deborah. And would you like questions as we go or towards the end?
Oh, probably the end once everybody's up here, so the appropriate person can answer.
Yeah, and as they present, I've asked them to sit in the front so that if we have questions, they can bounce back up.
Perfect.
So.
Excellent.
All right, this format might look familiar to you guys. This is a very similar presentation to what we used at the short-term rental workshop on Tuesday. I think it was actually May 11th. Again, all this information for everything regarding short-term rentals is up online on the Connect Muskegon page, so you can use the shortened URL or scan the QR code. If you're at home, it is mkgcity.com/STR. So the manager just gave a brief update, but today we're going to give the commission an update on short-term rentals, kind of what the staff has been doing internally, and then some updates from the building department and our housing impact here in the city. So I'm going to give you a brief update of what happened at our short-term rental workshop back in May. We were extremely excited, and I was very happy to have over 100 participants come out to the Muskegon Public Schools High School Auditorium. We had roughly a 30-minute presentation that was given by myself, Jennifer from the Michigan Municipal League, and then 2 of our residents also submitted videos. And then we had about 45 minutes of public comment where we listened to many of our residents and neighbors come up and discuss very constructively things that they would like to see happen with short-term rentals here in the city of Muskegon. Our staff has internally reviewed a lot of the questions that were asked during that time, and now on the URL I just shared with you, those comments and questions are posted publicly. So you guys can go through and review those, or I can pull them up later if you'd like me to. So we can review those frequently asked questions and then suggestions that were given to us staff and you commission to review. As a reminder, up on the Connect Muskegon page, again, that same URL, it looks something like this. We have 2 surveys or engagement opportunities that are open throughout the end of the year. There is a short-term rental survey that asks people to give their input and personal experiences with short-term rentals. We currently have 459 completed responses, so that means they took the whole entire survey and not just a couple questions. And then we also have a short-term rental incident form, which is posted on Connect Muskegon. This form allows people to report non-emergency short-term rental situations, good, bad, etc., so that our staff can really view, see, and understand what those issues are. You can see up here that we've had 14 people start this, but we've only had 2 people complete this form. It's very short and simple. It gives people the opportunity to leave comments, post pictures, say what type of issue they're having so we can better look at the data of short-term rentals. John, the manager touched on this briefly, but I just want to give you guys a visual of this timeline here. In April, we started the Connect Muskegon page and we had our survey go live. In May, we had our short-term rental workshop. In June, the city internal team had discussion and did research on short-term rentals in surrounding communities and things here in the city. In July, right now, we are updating you to the commission, and we've posted the comments and frequently asked questions from the short-term rental workshop. And then this fall, this is kind of rough, kind of what we decide moving forward, but we'll begin looking at updating processes and procedures and ordinances as needed. And then in winter, potentially we'll approve of a new rental ordinance or policy, hypothetically, if you guys decide to do those things. So now I'm going to pass it over to our building department. We're going to kind of tag team this. This is going to be a brief review of the registration process and the upkeep of, you guys can come up if you're ready, just kind of how they go through our current policies. So I'll be back up shortly, but on to the building department.
Hi, I'm Catherine from the building department. So this is just how you register a short-term rental. They come in and they can fill out the form, or they can fill it out online and send it in. They pay their fee, and once their fee is completed, then we set up an inspection. And if they pass their inspection, they are a registered short-term rental. This is just some of the general things we look for in the rental inspections when we go out there. If they pass their inspection the first time around, they get a 6-year certificate. Every year they still have to fill out the form and maintain that they are short-term. However, if they have no violations, we don't have to go back out and re-inspect the property inside. If there's a complaint, we'll address that, but if there's not, then we'll go back in. At the end of the 6 years, we'll go back out and do another inspection. It's the same for our long-term that we do for our short-term. If a violation is found, they don't get a license until they correct the violation. They have 30 days to take care of the violation. If they have any violations, they also get an inspection versus 6 years and 3 years. So it's not as long of an inspection period. If they don't register their short-term rental or long-term, they get a letter sent to them, and 30 days later they get another letter, and another 30 days after that the ticketing process begins. The first one is a $100 civil infraction, and then 30 days later it's a $250, and then another 30 days later they get a $500, and then 30 days after that they get a civil infraction that goes to the courthouse. So it's quite a lengthy process that there is. If anyone has any rental questions, they can always email us, and it's always anonymous. We don't tell anyone. If they think their neighbor is a short-term and they want to let us know, we don't tell anyone. They can call us, they can email us, or go online. This was some data that was back in May. We had 16 active enforcements open. This was actually working with one of our citizens. She sent us an entire list of properties that she believed were short-term rentals. So we went through the list and worked with her, and these were the results of that. So there were 16 active enforcements from the list that she had sent us. 19 of the homes were registered as owner-occupied. And in order to enforce them, once they're registered owner-occupied, we have to have some sort of proof that they are renting them out. So whether we could find them on Airbnb or Facebook or any of them, we have to have some sort of proof. And there were 67 of the property addresses that she sent us that were in the process at some point, and there were 9 of them that were registered second homes that they were saying they were not renting out in that list. This is the growth of the short-term rentals over the years. You'll notice that 19 was lower because that's when we first started our short-term rental program. This number is also from May. We now currently have 141 of them, but 10 of them did come from tiny digs. So our number has grown a little bit, but 10 of them were from tiny digs, so they are now registered. Compliance on our short terms versus our long terms. Our long-term rentals only have about a 50% compliance rate when we go back out there for the re-inspections, versus our short terms that have about 90%. They usually take care of it. Majority of our short terms have 0 safety violations in them compared to our long-term rental. These are just some ideas that we have going forward. We just found out you can apply for a governmental Airbnb account so you can see the addresses, because right now when we get on and try to actually look for them, there's no addresses on there. So trying to figure out exactly where that house is and what that address is a pretty complicated event, and we created a guide. It's not done. It's going to be a working document on what to do if you want to register your short-term rental, and just some different information on what to do and where you can go to find different information. And another recommendation we might have is to update our rental ordinance to the International Property Maintenance Code. That might help shortening the time frame on enforcements when we do start an enforcement, because that's kind of a lengthy process. Once we start that, realistically, by the time that we get to court, the short-term rental season is over in the city of Muskegon. We don't have a very long summer. And we are looking at trying to make it easier so when our residents get online, they can see whether it's a short-term or a long-term by typing in the address. Right now, if you type in the address, it's just going to show you that it's a rental. It's not going to tell you if it's short-term or long-term. About it.
Thank you.
Rosa wants to come up.
Good evening. How's everybody doing?
Welcome. Good evening.
All right, we'll just touch on this. This is something that came out from that neighborhood engagement, was some questions about enforcement, which would be in my purview. So you can look at this particular one in Beechwood Bluffton. It total out of the noise complaints, all noise complaints in the Beechwood Bluffton area from 2019 through 2023, which matches when the short-term rental first started, was 28. Out of those, 8 were from our short-term rentals. Parking violations, only 4 out of the 34. I will say this because the question always comes up, well, what do you do at a short-term rental when you have a noise complaint? Well, we would do the same thing as we do at any location that we'd have a noise complaint. Same way. So I recommend that if anybody has any issues with noise, that any residents just to call the non-emergency number and we'll come out as our calls allow. Just looking at our lakeside stats, it's a little bit lower. Only 4 out of the 61 noise complaints were actual short-term rentals, and 0 out of the 81 parking complaints. 2019 to present, I think.
Oh. All right. Thank you, Chief Kozel. Welcome, Director Ekholm.
Good evening, Mayor and Commission. So I offered to briefly touch on some summaries of the sections of our 5-year housing needs assessment. We did specifically ask Bowen National Research to conduct some additional inquiry into our short-term and vacation and seasonal housing stock. So the study, basically the question we were posed by the management pursuant to this was, is the short-term rental environment causing housing conditions that could exacerbate or impact homelessness? And so this, a couple slides kind of references the context area specifically for housing instability. So I'm going to get a little bit more specific as to the impacts of short-term rentals on potential housing shortage. The study basically indicates a significant percentage of vacant housing units in several neighborhoods are seasonal/recreational units. So the census data and other housing data doesn't differentiate between people that have seasonal homes, such as snowbirds, and short-term rentals, vacation rentals. Continued increases to the number of these can magnify housing shortages in areas that are experiencing them. We absolutely are. You'll note that in previous reviews of our housing needs assessment, our for sale product and for rent product, we have severe shortages by most industry standards. So some examples: Jackson Hill had the largest percentage increase in seasonal/recreational housing units, 37 units total. That represents like a 770% increase from 2010 to 2020. They effectively didn't exist at all in Jackson Hill and Marquette submarket. A large percentage of all the vacant units across the NIMS and Campbell Field submarket are seasonal and recreational units. So effectively a third of the vacant housing units in the Nims and Campbell Field neighborhoods are vacation rentals and/or seasonal houses. It's also true in Glenside and Lakeside, effectively a third of the vacancies that indicate that the vacation rental industry is taking units out of the permanent housing supply chain. So while they're a relatively small number of the total, they are taking away units that could effectively be used for long-term housing or permanent housing. Additionally, the total number of vacation and seasonal units in the city increased by 137 to 138% between 2010 and 2020 to 241 units. Notice that's different than the safe built figure because it also includes non-homesteaded seasonal vacation properties. So these are potentially people that live in other areas full time and have a vacation home here included with vacation rentals. This represents 1.6% of all the housing units in the city. Beechwood Bluffton has far and away the highest proportion of vacation and seasonal units. 26.1% of all the housing stock in Beechwood Bluffton is either seasonal or vacation rentals. And this is a direct quote from the Housing Needs Assessment's findings on short-term rentals. So while the effect of seasonal and recreational units on the primary study area, which is the city of Muskegon, is not to the extent experienced in other areas with high levels of tourism, the conversion of permanent housing to accommodate short-term rentals should be closely monitored in the future to ensure adequate permanent housing is available for area residents. When speaking with Bowen in our review meetings prior to the release of this study, they indicated that from an industry standard standpoint, we are not in what they would call like a problem percentage of short-term rentals. That is very drastic growth, and they acknowledge that. I think that can be attributed to the economic recovery in the city and the community, and the increased desirability of the community based on people's perceptions. So they said some markets that they've done studies in, a full 5% of the housing stock, so 1 in 20 housing units citywide, have either been seasonal homes or vacation rentals, and that creates a real strain on housing stock. This will continue to increase, we anticipate, due to the large number of infill housing along the lakeshore. That may not be vacation rentals, those are likely to be seasonal homes. So in answering the question that was posed to us by management for the purposes of this study, we don't believe that this has a disproportionate impact that could impact homelessness directly, because if you look where these units are, a full 70 some odd % of them are in the Beechwood Bluffton neighborhood, and then the majority of the remainder in Lakeside and Glenside. These are not traditionally housing unit areas that house people that are at risk of homelessness in the city. Those are primarily located in other neighborhoods. That being said, when folks that are maybe looking for higher priced housing cannot find housing in that price point, they tend to still have the buying power to move down the housing supply chain, and that has a downward effect on all housing price points. So it's undeniable it's having an impact. As to whether or not it's having a direct impact on homelessness, as of now, the answer is likely no.
Thank you, Director Ekholm. Floor is yours, Mr. Manager.
So I guess we're going to open it back up to questions. Sorry, I was writing notes. To the staff here on anything they presented. I have a couple of questions, just clarification points that I jotted down. Do you want me to run through those? Or okay.
Go ahead, Mr. Manager.
To the enforcement timeline, Catherine, if that, just for clarification purposes, the short-term rental and long-term rental enforcements are about the same or are the same?
They are the same process.
And so if we were to be able to find a way to shorten that enforcement timeline, because currently that takes us outside of the season, that might be a helpful tool in cases where we have violations.
Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to make sure that was clear there. So this isn't necessarily a question, this is more of a comment. But I do want to point out that from the regulations that we currently have in place that the building department is able to enforce, those regulations are working. It's just that within the timelines that we have, it's not necessarily ideal, I think is probably the best way to say that. So the building department is doing the enforcements as they come in and working through that process, but because the process is so long, it's not allowing them to be addressed within the season. And so sometimes what ends up happening is if, say someone gets a violation at the beginning of June, their follow-up is in beginning of July, the ticket comes in the beginning of August, or ticking back through that. So by the time you actually get to court, you're looking at October, and and there can be a question of, well, is this still a short-term rental? Or is this still a rental issue? And if the answer is no, then it can get thrown out. And so then you start over. So then you start the process over again, because of how short our rental season is. And there are instances where we have short-term rentals who in the off-season become long-term rentals. I don't know, Chief, did you have something to clarify on that?
But, you're talking about shortening as a possibility,
Yeah.
correct? You look at what, $850 fines after 90 days, that's 2 days of short-term rental.
Right. That too. Yeah.
I mean, we're looking at something that somebody would easily just want to, I'll just pay it. It's a civil infraction. It's not going to affect my criminal history. I'm just throwing that out there.
That was going to be my next point.
I apologize.
No, you're
You'll bring that
good.
up?
Same wavelength, but thank you. Yeah. I think okay. And on the noise and parking violations, I did want to point out, and something that we didn't get to, and the mayor had asked me about, was the proportion of the short-term rentals to the total in the neighborhood, and does that percentage outweigh? Don't have that number yet, but we're working on getting that. The one thing that I do want to point out is that we did cross-reference both the registered short-term rentals and the suspected short-term rental list that we got, and we did an address-by-address search to do those cross-reference numbers. So Emily did that. Thank you, Emily. In the police department. Yep. So those are my major things.
Thank you, Mr. Manager. Commissioner Ramsey?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Great job, everyone. Deborah, again, great job. And thank you for sharing the timeline. Even though it's estimated and may change throughout the process, the timeline is always a great tool for our neighbors to use. I want to start with Safe Built. I concur that the process is too long and the fees are not high enough. So if this is in fact also affecting our long-term, not long-term rentals, but I don't want to say permanent rentals because neither of those things seem to be the appropriate term, but a standard rental, I don't know, whatever. If these are the same guidelines for both short-term and permanent rentals, long-term rentals, then expediting the infraction process is only going to help our renting neighbors more if in fact what's happening at the property is not their fault, but the lies at the feet of the owner of said property. So it will also help us to move through some actions around maybe some landlords who are not being on the up and up of stuff, right? And that's never hurt anybody's feelings.
Correct.
To give people places that are great to live in. So I would absolutely 100% look at how to shorten that schedule, increase the fees, and make sure that they know that we mean business. Because that's also a huge feedback that we got from this session, Deborah, if you'll recall, is that the neighbors were like, well, I called, or this or that, or there's these things. And so now that we have a process, let's show them that it works. And for the government account, for the thing, that's great. Do that to that. Okay, thank you. For Chief?
To clarify, just real quick,
Yeah.
Commissioner Ramsey, you mentioned increase the fees. Were you mean fines?
Yeah,
Increase the fines?
yes.
Okay,
So
I just wanted to
sorry.
make sure.
Fines, not the $250
Fines.
a year. No,
Okay.
the fines.
The
Sticking
fines.
to them. Yeah, you can increase that. She's right.
Civil infractions.
Civil infraction fines.
Yeah.
Yes.
And then potential to expedite that process.
Yes,
Okay.
please. And then just to move through the other two, I want to thank the chief for showing us the breakdown of the complaints so that we can share the narrative with our neighbors that it's not all these short-term rentals. They are not the bane of all existence in Muskegon County. Everybody calm down. But that there is an opportunity for us to serve. And we love those opportunities highlighted. And then to Jake, thank you for bringing it back to the forefront of our mind with the housing study, because as we look at truly implementing a process and plan for that over the next 5 years, this will be a part of that. And we don't want people to paint a picture in their own narrative that makes these people look, that criminalizes short-term rentals, because it is a huge economy and a lot of it is owned by local business owners, which we've had the pleasure of meeting. So as we talk about providing a better livable community for our neighbors, they are a part of this within that housing study as well. So thank you for bringing it back. Done.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramsey. Commissioner St. Clair.
Thank you. I also would like to express my appreciation for all of the work that went into this. I know this has been a huge lift, and I really appreciate that. I concur with the importance of speeding up that timeline. I would like to see significantly larger teeth applied to people who are not in compliance for both short-term and long-term rental. I would also entertain the idea of increasing the fees for registration. I think that we are very generous in what we charge people to do business in the city. So I think that that's another avenue to look at. I found the enforcement of or the complaints really interesting, because as a commissioner, I get a lot of complaints about people's perception that the SROs are a nuisance for parking, and I got a couple of messages this week that that was a problem, and that tells me that the community is annoyed, but not following an enforceable process. So if anybody is watching this, I would really encourage you to take the steps to report the issues that you are seeing so that we can tally that data. And then Director Ekholm, I had a question for you, and this I suppose is a little speculative and maybe a little unfair, but I feel like knowing how much time you have spent on housing and immersed in that study, you said that currently, no, you said that the SRO is not impacting homelessness, and I'm wondering, would you care to state if that is a no or a no, not yet?
So STR, not SRO,
I'm
right?
sorry,
Yeah,
yes.
single room
Short-term
occupancy.
rental,
Yeah,
yes.
short-term rental.
Yep.
Yep. So, a direct question was asked, and these studies are not meant to give direct declarative answers. And so, I think the main conclusion that section of the housing needs assessment draws is you're seeing a drastic increase in the number of either seasonal or vacation properties in your community. 138% increase over 10 years. That's substantial. But it also draws the conclusion that this is not to the degree of other areas with high levels of tourism. And so I think what they're kind of telegraphing, and then by stating like this should be monitored, is what they say, and we will over the next several years. I think they're saying not yet, it could. So there are markets that have, waterfront communities that are more mid-market communities they kind of drew our attention to that are having real systemic issues. Like, as I mentioned, 1 in 20 total housing units is a vacation rental or a seasonal house. And so, and those tourist economies, and we're seeing this somewhat in our economy, are drawn more and more into like service industry job provision. So a lot of those folks are, moderate income earners, and then they can't find reasonable housing because so much of the housing stock, including in some cases multifamily housing stock, is basically reserved for seasonal housing. I would point to Grand Traverse area in our state as a good example, and we're a far cry from that proportion of seasonality and proportion of vacation rentals. So, to give you a long answer to a short question, I think the answer is not yet. And it also, in speaking with some of these investors, from an economic development standpoint, a lot of them are realizing very healthy returns in areas we wouldn't expect. And so, and the reason for that is the access to that housing is cheaper. So if you can buy one in perhaps Jackson Hill, that's close to downtown, 3-minute drive, to all the breweries and all the amenities, and access that home for $130,000 rather than $400,000+ in Beechwood Bluffton, you tend to realize better cash flow. So I anticipate over the next several years we're going to see a strong market correction of that industry, where some of the units that are in the areas that are most impacted, like Beechwood Bluffton, may not stay short-term rentals. This is speculative, as you mentioned, and that we may see it become a problem in maybe areas we didn't expect. in the city that are now perceived to be more desirable or safe or whatever, whatever bias you'd like to speak to. But I think that we have to keep a close eye on that, because that's often where our truly income and resource constrained residents are living. And so that's my bigger worry.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Any follow-up?
Nope.
Thank you, Commissioner St. Clair. Commissioner Gorman or Commissioner Emery? Commissioner Gorman.
Thank you. I had a question on the noise complaint numbers. More so, is the number we're seeing for complaints received, like legit complaints? And that I've heard from owners of short-term rentals say they've got called because their occupants were playing cornhole too loud, and so somebody called on that. Where, I mean, I'm not a law enforcement officer, so I don't think that was be noisy, but you know what I mean? So is this like true? There was a violation.
It wouldn't be separated. When we get the call, it might be in the notes, but when we had extrapolated the date, it was just, we responded.
Okay, I'm just trying to discern, like, if we just have angry neighbors calling because they want to see these numbers inflated, if there's opportunity to have
It could be
that
500
filtered out.
people or 2 people in the backyard
Okay.
playing cornhole.
Got it. Thank you. My second question, to Commissioner St. Clair's point, do we have any sense then of short-term rentals in the city we know have existed that have now been sold because that person maybe chose to get out of the business of doing this, and found better opportunity just selling property?
Had a few landlords who got into short term and they said what they expected it was going to be, and they did not make the amount of money that they had anticipated, so they did sell them. I don't know at this point what exactly the addresses were and if they sold them to a homeowner, if they sold them to another.
Okay. Thank you. That's very helpful. That's all.
Thank you, Commissioner Gorman. Commissioner Emery.
Oh, I should have had her stay up there. Sorry.
Catherine.
All of my other questions have been answered, so thank you for all of this and everyone's hard work. The searchable, talked about the searchable database on Safe Belt's website for rental registrations.
On the City of Muskegon's website, there is a section, it's not on
Yeah,
there.
it's the rental registration search tool.
Yes.
You're right, that is the City of Muskegon's website. When I have looked up rentals, short-term rentals, they're not listed. And yet I know that they are, but they're not listed either, nor as a rental. So
that's something we'll have to get with IT about. I just simply every week run a report and it goes to an automated file and then it gets uploaded. And it is a weekly report that we run, so that way you know if the certificate's been suspended or is on hold or if it's a new rental. So that is something we'll have to get with IT about and see if they can.
Yes, please. Thank you.
So just to piggyback on that, so right now you run that weekly report of all rentals in our city and then share that with IT. It gets uploaded, then you can query, look up an address and see if it's a rental. Right now we're not distinguishing whether it's a short-term versus long-term rental. It's just that it is a rental property.
Correct.
Okay. And what's that called? How can people access that?
It's right if you go on the City of Muskegon and then you click on like the inspection department, it says like rental search tool or something like that is what it's named, and you can type in the address and it'll pull it up.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you. Any follow-up, Commissioner Emery?
No, I'm good. Thank you.
Any other questions or thoughts, commissioners? All right. Great information. Thank you, all of our staff members, for putting this together and giving us an update on where we're at since we initiated this process some months ago, and giving us an outlook of where we're going to go, timeline understanding. So we're not necessarily actively policy making right now, but that's going to be forthcoming this fall into the winter with regard to that. I'm just trying to think if there's anything that we could do in the meantime, like the expediting that but probably not. We are going to be getting the government Airbnb though. That's something that we're going to be able to get sooner. Okay, excellent. And so just to emphasize for folks that are at home or in the audience, that we do have this portal online with Connect MKG, so you can understand the process thus far, the outlook for where we're going, as well as an opportunity to report incidences that happen. If they happen, you can go online and share that so that we're aware more of the data collection. But then also it's been mentioned that you can contact the non-emergency number. So can someone share the, I guess I can Google it, but can someone share what the non-emergency number is? Anybody got that off the top of their head?
Well, if it's the one on our survey, it's not a number. It's a survey form to fill out. So if there's a short-term rental issue that you're noticing in your neighborhood and you want us to be aware of it, you can fill that form out, attach pictures, things of that nature. But were you talking about like if there was an actual like non-emergency that they wanted to report to 911?
So it was mentioned earlier, if there's noise complaints or parking issues, that you call the non-emergency number.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Sorry.
So
yeah,
you got that?
Yes.
Okay. Could you come to the microphone for folks at home?
So that the non-emergency is 722-3524.
3524. 722-3524.
Prefer it that way than tying up a 911 call.
Oh, yeah.
All right. You can
Reference, please.
Good to know. Thank you. Yeah, I will just echo what I've heard over here in terms of trying to expedite the enforcement process. I think that is appropriate for both short-term and long-term rentals. Because if there are issues with housing, regardless of the duration, we want to be on top of it. So I do certainly so give my support or countenance to reviewing that and seeing how we can improve that process. Yeah, Commissioner Emery?
I have another question for you, please. Can you tell us what the government Airbnb website is or database?
It's through Airbnb, but we don't have access to it yet. We are trying to figure out how to gain access to that.
Okay, so
it's been applied for, I've been told, and it is pending.
So what if an Airbnb? What if they are not registered there?
So if we find a house that is on Airbnb and we don't have them registered, that's when we start the enforcement process on them.
Okay.
So if we get on the website and we happen to find 123 Adams Street is advertising that they are for rent, but we don't have them registered, that's when we start that process.
Okay, because I've found several. Being Ward 4 Commissioner, I have done lots of research with this and have found several that are not.
So if there are any addresses that you believe are short terms or even long term that are not registered, if you want to email us, you can email us at muskegon@safebuilt.com, or you can call us, and it is always anonymous so nobody knows, and we can look into that process and see if they are registered or if they're not registered, if it's a glitch in the system that you're not seeing it, and we can start the enforcement process.
Okay, so, but what I'm saying, they may not be registered anywhere.
So we have to have something that is showing that they are a rental. We have to have proof. So if we go to court, we can't just say we have speculation that they are a rental. We have to have some sort of proof, whether we find it or not. We can't just go off we
so
think.
how is that done if they're not registered anywhere and I only suspect that? How do I prove that, or how do you prove that?
So you could email us the address, call us with the address. We can look at the water account. Sometimes would tell us if it's in a different person's name. We can call them and have a discussion with them and ask them and just be like, we have speculation that you're renting it out, but if we do not have proof, and there's always going to be some people who try to skirt around, and that may happen. We do our best to find them and take care of it, but unfortunately without some sort of proof, we can't go to court and enforce them if we don't have any proof that
Right,
they
and
are.
I understand that. I just know of several in my ward that are doing exactly that and not. You're not finding them on Airbnbs, but all the neighbors are saying that yes, there's
So
5 different cars in it every weekend.
So unfortunately, having 5 different cars doesn't prove that they're a rental. You can have a second home, you can have your friends and family there. We have to have some sort of proof. But like I said, you can always give us the address and we can try to look for the proof that they are, and leave the enforcing on to us to try to figure it out. But we appreciate any addresses that people want to give us, because we are looking at Facebook, we're looking at Airbnb, VRBO. We're definitely looking for them.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Commissioner Emery. Don't go anywhere quite yet, Catherine. When
Popular.
when you do discover properties, however you discover properties that are not registered, and so you speak with the property owner to get them registered, do you also pass that information along to the county so that they're aware of this property in question needing to be registered, so they can, the assessor's office can properly assess the property, the accommodations tax can be charged? Are we sharing and coordinating with the county at all?
We do not. If we happen to find that they are 100% homesteaded, we have emailed them in the past, but we don't directly seek out to give out that information.
Okay. Are there reasons why? Is it just capacity constraints, or is that something that we could start doing going forward if there's a desire to do so, a directive to do so?
I could very easily probably email them, like even monthly, the list of short terms. I pull that list a couple times a week, honestly.
Okay.
So it wouldn't be hard to email them the list. And if they wanted to go through it and see if they're homesteaded or see if anything, we could do that.
Okay, yeah. And it'll be incumbent upon them, but the more we coordinate and share information, I think would be helpful. So, of course, it's incumbent upon them to follow through and take action. But if we have the information readily available, I think it'd be helpful to pass it along. All right, that's it for now, I think. Catherine, now, commissioners, you heard a month ago, I'm going to kind of give you a heads up, and we're going to have this update on short-term rentals, where we're at in the policy-making process and review and what the outlook is, that I had said just as a heads up, something to reflect on over the following month was the possibility of doing a moratorium on new short-term rentals in the meantime that we are evaluating the policy and looking at potential policy changes. So what I'm interested in tonight is not necessarily a yay or nay on a moratorium. I'm more interested in understanding if there is sufficient support for us to explore a moratorium, and so that we can have a formal conversation about the moratorium, engage legal counsel on the moratorium, the contours of what that moratorium would look like. And for me, my interest in a moratorium is in relation to what Director Eckelman shared from the housing impact study, and that I see the concern with the diversion of housing stock to short-term rentals that could be used for our residents, or whether existing residents or newcomer residents, is taking away housing stock. And that's not to say I'm interested in banning it outright in perpetuity, but it's more so while we're getting our arms around this and looking at adjusting policy, and there's a lot of different facets of what that policy could look like going forward, that while we're getting our arms around that and looking at making tweaks or adding new ordinances, that in the meantime we put a pause on new short-term rentals. Now, that could be all short-term rentals, it could be a subsection of short-term rentals. That's kind of what I'm talking about in terms of what a contour of a moratorium would look like. And so I'm not here with a firm policy initiative say yay or nay on this. It's more of, do we have an interest and an appetite to have that conversation and explore a temporary moratorium while we are doing the work and staff's doing the work to make tweaks and adjustments to our regulatory framework for short-term rentals. Mr. Manager.
So I did have a conversation with legal counsel just to kind of get some broad strokes, because obviously I knew this was going to come up, and so just to kind of let you know where he's coming from. But I also wanted to let you know, let the commission know that since this idea was floated last month, there have been a number of people who have reached out to the city, different offices, asking to start the process to try to get in ahead of any moratorium. I did want to pass that along. The legal counsel says yes, a moratorium can be put into place. However, it needs to be for a specific period of time and cannot be indefinite. And that it could be something as simple as directing the clerk in the building department not to process business licenses related to short-term rentals or inspection applications. We could, look at grandfathering STRs in that are already in a certain point in the process, but we'd have to be very definitive about what that is or where they're at in that process. Those are just some of the things that the legal counsel brought up in our conversation.
Very good. Thank you. Good context to have. So it sounds like we have the opportunity to do moratorium if we so choose. We'll have to have a definite period for however long that may be, and then what the contours of it exactly are. Whether that is all short-term rentals, although I'm not personally of the mind of doing a kibosh on all short-term rentals because we have a number of them that exist already and operate. So it's not necessarily to harm or hinder their operations. My interest is in terms of these houses that are going on sale, and a number of them in select neighborhoods are getting bought, sight unseen from investors from outside of the community and using them for short-term rentals. So it's taking away from our housing stock, and so it's trying to. It's for me, it's an acknowledgement of the housing crisis that we're in. We've been highlighting the study and the implications and the impacts for our community, and so doing a temporary moratorium for me is a reflection of that acknowledgement that we are in a housing crisis, and so take some real world action to reflect that. It's just one piece. It's not the cure all be all. It's not like the housing crisis is going to undo itself because of a moratorium, but it's just one piece going forward. But I'm going to stop speaking now, and I want to hear from my fellow commissioners on this if there is any interest to further explore. Commissioner St. Clair.
I would not be opposed to a moratorium. I think that this has been a long process, collecting data and doing some due diligence, and I don't think we're very close to the end of the process. And I do have concerns that folks that speculate on these things are going to be motivated to get in while they can, and could very quickly do some significant damage just in case we do something that isn't favorable. So, all that to say, yes, I am in favor of looking at a moratorium.
Thank you, Commissioner St. Clair. Commissioner Emery.
I would also be in favor of it.
Thank you, Commissioner Emery. Commissioner Gorman, or?
Do you want to go? Do you want me to go? Okay. I have zero interest in a moratorium. That's not to say that could change in the future, but I just feel like where we are in this process right now, because we have so many questions, I don't feel strongly that I'm hearing from our community that is a sure sign of that they know that we are committed to addressing the housing crisis in our city, and we have done a lot of work and supported a lot of work that Director Ekholm's doing to show how serious we're taking that issue. I just don't think this is an opportunity where we're going to win anybody over, and if they aren't already believing that we are trying to address that problem. But I would love to work with our staff to firm up this process, to enforce short-term rentals. And then again, I feel like through that process, like what we're already hearing, it's going to be, let's let the free market do what it's going to do. People are going to decide they want to be in this business or they're going to get out of it. And so I'm interested to see how naturally that's going to play into things. And again, because our housing study didn't, I forgot you said, Director Ekholm, there was not a clear, definitive, like, we are in a percentage of concern of short-term rentals and our market. That definitely impacts how I feel about this, and yeah, that's it. Okay.
Thank you, Commissioner Gorman.
My apologies in advance. I'm not going to be as eloquent as my colleagues. I also have little to no interest in a moratorium, only because I think that we are at a spot, and I want to highlight what Commissioner Gorman and what Commissioner St. Clair said, that we're in a spot where we're doing all of this data collection and we're learning and we're moving and we're learning from Safe Belt what their process is. We know what's happening at complaints, and Jake is always bringing back the housing study to the forefront of our minds for consideration. But that is showing to our neighbors, those neighbors who own small businesses and those who just live as neighbors, that we're doing work around this. And I would really like to harness that energy and move on this quickly. I think that as we continue to think about how we look at rentals, period, across the city, and we look at updating ordinances and codes and things that are way beyond my pay scale, our neighbors across the board will only benefit from that. So I would encourage our staff to get on it. And I think that we need to move through this process in a way that is efficient, effective, but that also is serving the way that our neighbors need to be served. And how are we looking at what's happening, what can happen, and what should happen? Because these, while the mayor is very valid with the point of it being some of these properties being sold to not local entities, a lot of these properties are local entities and they do bolster our economy, and it also affects small business and the tourism in our summer, which is now. So maybe if there was a moratorium and we looked at a winter thing, but I'm still not hot for that because this should be happening before the winter. So I would really encourage our staff to do some quick turnaround on the good stuff that we've learned, because it hasn't been for lack of learning. There's just a lot to process, to echo what the fine commissioner said. She's 100% correct, but I do think that we have the opportunity to do so, and in a speedy fashion.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramsey. Commissioner Emery?
I forgot now. Wait.
Put it on the back.
I was back to what Michael was saying. With all due respect to my fellow commissioners,
of course,
your neighborhoods are not the ones that are being affected as much as Beechwood, Bluffton, Lakeside, Glenside. Seriously, there's been such a turnover of owner-occupied housing that is now short-term rentals. And we have a number of short-term rentals that are indeed short-term rentals, but are not registered anywhere.
Yeah.
Yet the whole block knows that they're short-term rentals. And some of the houses, actually, I found are even 100% homesteaded, which is another no-no. So I am absolutely for putting a halt to it until our staff can wrap their arms around it and get a better idea of what to do. That's my firm belief.
My feelings are not hurt. Thank you for sharing that, though.
I love you,
and
Michael.
I think that you have a valid point, Teresa, that this is happening more in your neighborhoods and not so much in mine. But I also want to think about what's going on in Jackson Hill, and unfortunately, their commissioner isn't here tonight. But when we talk about what's happening there, can we also look at how that's affecting housing in that neighborhood? Because if we're going to talk about housing and turnover into rental, that would be my first place to go. Beechwood and Bluffton, they're going to be okay. But how are we looking at more marginalized populations across our city? So I would have more concern there. However, I still don't know if it's the right thing to do because of the way that it affects our local economy. Mm-hmm. And I don't know a lot about that, right? But I know that a lot of people have shown up and shown out and been a part of this process. So how do we serve the most? And I think that really is about the expeditious treatment of the opportunities that we've already identified just tonight. You know? But absolutely. But get on it.
Thank you, Commissioner Ramsey. Thank you, Commissioner Emery. I'll give you a chance for a follow-up.
I'll forget by then.
Jot it down. Just to kind of echo a little bit of, or expound on a little bit what Commissioner Emery was saying, I have been hearing concerns from folks in certain neighborhoods about when houses come online, they don't have an opportunity to buy them. Or, they have family or friends that want to move into the neighborhood, but they don't have the opportunity to buy them. That all these cash offers that come in, and then it gets turned into a short-term rental, and they don't have a chance to buy them. And so there are certain areas that are getting overwhelmed with this, and we don't know what the end result of the policy review is going to look like. It could end up, and I'm not advocating, don't take this as advocating, but it could. It has been suggested by some in our community that we have caps, whether it's a cap citywide or it's a cap, per neighborhood or ward or something. We've heard suggestions of a cap. That's not a foregone conclusion. We're going to do a cap, but it's not off the table either. We are not ruling in or out things. We're open to policy changes and additions. And so the concern, though, is if we do end up with a cap, that while this is playing out, as Commissioner St. Clair was saying, folks knowing that we're doing this process, we may see an uptick in purchasing of housing stock for short-term rental in those areas that may be more prone to having some kind of cap. And so just adding a little bit more context. And while I recognize that what Director Eckham, and we'll give him an opportunity to come up here because I think he might want to weigh in. But when Director Eckham was speaking in terms of the direct impact and homelessness, I don't see the current situation as directly contributing to homelessness, as he said. But it's not just about homeless or housing insecure folks that I'm necessarily speaking to as part of a moratorium. It's a diversion of housing stock, period. And it can have that trickle-down effect, indirect effect that Director Eckham was talking about in terms of folks in the lower ladders of the socioeconomic scale. But Director Eckham, did you want to jump in and add any more context or clarity?
Yes. So I wanted to start, the question we were asked on the development services side to answer for the purposes of this work session was not a policy-driven question on whether or not there should be or shouldn't be a moratorium or any other kind of restrictions placed on short-term rentals, but there's a lot more context in the assessment and what we're seeing in the economic development environment as it pertains to housing that may assist you in making a policy decision. So first and foremost, I think it's important to recognize, some of which I touched on in the slide, there are areas of the city where this is a real problem. If the industry standard is 5% of housing units being in this cohort, and that can be a strain on the housing stock, Beechwood Bluffton is at 26%. So I think those residents have a very fair concern. Next Wednesday, the 19th of July, we have our housing needs assessment review for the Beechwood Bluffton submarket of the housing study, and I anticipate that far and away that will be the largest topic of conversation. Much as it was with blight and other issues that were more prevalent in other submarkets. So, fair enough. I would also point out that in the McLaughlin, Angel, Marshfield submarket, there are no short-term rentals, or 0.2% of the housing stock there. So what I would say is I don't know that this is, and I think you're seeing that in the conversation playing out by the commission. So I think a moratorium will lead to some issues that other communities have run into when they've tried to ban short-term and vacation rentals. Clandestine or illegal operations are pretty easy to do, so I think it's going to have a pretty substantial and disproportionate impact on our enforcement time and resources. And I'm not saying that we're advocating one way or the other, but these are problems that other folks have run into that have tried to limit it. I think there's some communities along the coast in South Carolina and Florida that have tried to place bans or have tried to say, okay, we're going to keep what we have, but you can't have any more. There's been litigation around this issue pretty widely. So I just wanted to make sure I bring all that context to the forefront. I'm sure most of you have done a lot of research yourselves. I think some of the points brought up by Safe Built tonight and their representatives in this presentation are reflective of what I would describe as best practices in the housing space to try to mitigate certain types of housing, including short-term rentals. So, making sure that there's a high cost to entry, there's a quick response to violation. Those are important. Another thing I would point out, and some of this is anecdotal, but we've noticed on the east side, so as I mentioned, there's 37 either seasonal or vacation rentals in Jackson Hill. That's up from nearly none previously. And we've managed to talk to some of those people, and almost exclusively those are multi-generational households who have inherited grandma and grandpa's house and may not live in that neighborhood anymore. Those people are disproportionately people of color. They are disproportionately having an easier time getting into the short-term rental investment market in that part of the city than they would in a Beechwood Bluffton or in a Lakeside or Glenside, where it takes more resources to enter that trade. And so I think there may be ways for staff to explore, and I'm sure our planning team can help us with this, taking a look at, the total percentage of housing stock in each individual submarket in the housing study or census tract or neighborhood, and placing limitations on a total percentage of housing stock being restricted for short-term rentals by some sort of geographic limitation rather than an entire moratorium. Again, that's not a specific recommendation, but I think there's ways to do this where we can provide a market for this type of housing without having it, inundate our housing stock, because there are real problems on the west side of the city. And my fear, as I mentioned earlier, is that areas where people are under-resourced and truly need all the housing units that we can have available could be displaced if this becomes more popular in other parts of the city. So I think regulations need to be looked at seriously, as you guys are, but I would just mention that there's a lot more context in that study and in the housing market in general than what we were able to present to you tonight. And I'm obviously available for any follow-ups.
Excellent. Thank you, Director Colm. Any questions for Director Colm? Follow-up questions? Okay. Thank you. Okay.
Did not forget. I just want to I live in Lakeside on Blodgett, and within a 5-6 block radius of my house, there is now over a dozen short-term rentals. So, I mean, the growth in the west side is just unbelievable. And it's even worse when you get farther closer to the lake, of course. And now I am concerned about Jackson Hill. I hadn't thought about Jackson Hill and what a perfect location that is for vacationers. So it just solidifies my...
Thank you, Commissioner Emery. Yeah, yes. when you heard earlier about the considerable growth in Jackson Hill, that did also reinforce, because while this problem has been primarily focused on the west end, seeing it in Jackson Hill, and the potential, because of the lower cost of entry, the potential for diverting housing stock from people that want to live in that neighborhood is a concern. Although hearing the caveat that a good number of the short-term rentals that have come online in Jackson Hill are due to inheritance and people turning into income-generating properties, which I think is great for generating multi-generational wealth. That gives me maybe alleviates some of my concerns somewhat in terms of the impacts on Jackson Hill, because I know that we have been keen on how we can, our community can have greater wealth opportunities, income opportunities, and multi-generational wealth in particular. I do just want to, and I see you, Commissioner Garman, I'm going to call you in just a second. I do just want to make it clear that when I was speaking about the moratorium and the impacts, doing a moratorium as a reflection of the housing crisis, that is not to negate all the other things that we are doing in terms of combating the housing crisis. And we've been very creative as a city and very collaborative as a city. I'd say ahead of many of our other municipalities across the state in trying to bring on more housing stock and make housing more accessible. It just so happens that we are in a in-demand city again. We're a revitalizing city, and so demand is increasing, and so we're struggling to keep up, but we're certainly making valiant efforts and being creative in doing so. So, Commissioner Gorman.
Thank you. I just want to say, for perspective for the commission and so our residents know where I'm coming from, I just refuse to look at short-term rentals through one very negative lens, and I feel like that's the agenda that's sometimes being pushed on me. So then when I'm seeing data that reflects minimal problems for short-term rental issues in neighborhoods, then I'm again challenged to think of like, if I'm looking at my neighborhood that has changed, I acknowledge the change, and it is a lot of short-term rentals, but they're not all troublesome tenants, then is the challenge that just my neighborhood has changed and I don't want to accept it. And I just want to encourage everyone to think about how much work we have been doing as a community to make Muskegon an attractive place to vacation that sometimes leads people to start thinking about wanting to live here. And the work that a lot of these owners of short-term rentals do to not only promote this as a great place to visit and live, but the collaborations they do with a lot of our local businesses to promote those businesses while they're here, which is the livelihood of a lot of our tourism season. So I want to say I hear the challenges that are happening, but I think we need to think broader, though, of the opportunities that this also brings to our city.
Thank you, Commissioner Gorman. Commissioner St. Clair.
Thanks. I would like to clarify, in case anyone is confused, that I am not anti short-term rental. I use Airbnbs frequently when I travel because it's convenient and enjoyable. So just to put that on the table, I'm not anti anything. What I am concerned about is the fact that Beechwood Bluffton is now almost 25% short-term rentals. That's not sustainable and that's not fair to that neighborhood. It's not a small impact. I also understand that they're not necessarily using the tools that we're offering them to report the issues that are happening, but that by no means negates their concerns. I will again encourage them to use those tools to report the concerns because we can't fix it if we don't know how it's broken. I am a huge fan of this city and this community, and I want the whole world to come live here. But unfortunately, right now they can't buy a house because we have a housing shortage, and part of that housing shortage comes down to what the current housing stock is being used for. And it is expanding, as somebody who has used Airbnb for, I don't know, I think I started using it 7 or 8 years ago. I have kept an eye on the Muskegon market, just curious. Like, I remember when we had 0 Airbnbs here, and then all of a sudden it got to be 20, and then it was 50, and then it exploded exponentially a few years ago. And I know that snowballs are really hard to stop. So once something gets going and you have something good, it becomes widely known that this is a good thing, and we want to feed that. We want people to come to our community, and we want them to enjoy it and to stay here. But I don't feel like we have a control of this situation, and I'm afraid that we're really going to lose control quickly.
Yes.
That's my thoughts behind supporting some pretty aggressive response to this, whatever that looks like, so that we don't end up like Traverse City, where they cannot afford to open businesses, which I know is really important because they don't have staff, because their staff can't commute, because they can't pay them enough to live in their town. And I understand that we're not there yet, but Traverse City didn't used to be there either. And then suddenly there were, and you had a catastrophic issue that affected everyone, including the business community. So I don't want to be Chicken Little, but I do feel like we need to be paying some pretty intense attention to this, even if it's not happening in your neighborhood, because it will be soon. Because my neighborhood is getting bought out, and they're going to move on. It's clear that our community is a pretty great place to be, and more people are understanding that.
Indeed. Thank you. Well said, Commissioner St. Clair. Commissioner Ramsey.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners, for sharing. I'm very privileged to sit on this board with all of you who care so much about this place. That's amazing. But what I do hear is that there is desire for us to act fast. And so I would love for us to encourage staff to show us a timeline with some dates that looks like it's updated and it's something that we can handle as staff, so that we look like, if we were to look at a moratorium, that we look at what that realistically looks like, and it's not this just broad discussion of, are we going to put everything to a halt? What does that look like? Because as legal counsel has shared, it's a specific amount of time and it's not extended, it's not this. So what is the capacity of staff to be able to operate within that time? Because obviously if we have a split, if there's split interests like this, maybe there's a place to compromise with the length of time that a moratorium is. And if staff says we can do this in 6 weeks, I'm not opposed to that 6 weeks happening in November. Or, you know, is there something else that looks like that? So I would encourage staff to help to inform us which way to go, especially Commissioner Gorman and myself.
Catherine.
Sure.
Catherine?
So I actually have an ordinance already kind of drafted. We've looked at it a couple of times. We could probably have that presented, I would say, within 2 months, to try to get this ball rolling a little faster.
I would encourage the manager to pull together a team of wonderful representatives from our city staff to look at what the timeline looks like and all the moving parts that need to be finished and put into place, so that we can move quickly in any direction.
I do want to be clear that that ordinance is not just for short term, it is for long term and short term.
Support anything that gives our neighbors better opportunity for livability.
Mr. Manager, you want to chime in?
Yeah. And another thing that I would suggest, and this is Director Will's suggestion, and it's a good one, is that the staff provide commission with whether it's monthly updates or updates at each commission meeting on maybe new registrations that are coming through, the numbers and the enforcement, so that way we can, because we're already doing that weekly, and so that way you guys can have a better pulse on exactly how things are changing. You know, this it's a really good discussion, and I think we're really kind of having a higher level philosophical discussion on where we want our community to go and what we want it to look like, and maybe the hurt or the troubles that we are hearing about with the short-term rentals might not be the core of the issue. It's more on the other side, and kind of keeping that in mind. And then I was going to say something else, and it left my brain, so I apologize.
It's happened to us all one night. Put it on the back burner, and then I'll come to you. Yeah. No, this is very much a multifaceted issue. It's not one particular angle to look at it. Yeah, go ahead. See, put it on the back burner. Pop up.
And now, I'm saying this with the knowledge that this was a staff recommendation at the May engagement, but the intent was to gather information throughout the summer and make recommendations from that point. So just kind of reminding the commission of that. Obviously, like I said, that was a staff recommendation, but that was what we were broadcasting. So.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor, I appreciate the opportunity for us to get regular updates for this specifically, because it is such a, as people have shared, it's a time-sensitive matter, right? And so I think that just building it into our next several agendas, I would not be opposed to.
Yeah, certainly would welcome updates periodically. So I'm a little torn. On the one hand, in terms of whether to expedite the process, certainly you want to have a resolution, and I can understand foregoing a moratorium while we're trying to find the resolution, because we don't necessarily want to get bogged down in debate over moratorium and the counters of moratorium and distracting us from pursuit of the updated regulatory framework. But I don't necessarily want to speed up that process unnecessarily either, because as tonight we've been emphasizing to our community to report and share experiences to help inform the policymaking process. So I don't want to be sending mixed messages in that regard. Like give the community more time, and then come with those policy recommendations. You know, after the season is completed itself from staff. My thought on the moratorium was just to kind of provide a pause or relieve some pressure on our housing stock, even if it was for a relatively short period of 6 months. Again, just reflection of where we are in our city and our community from a housing perspective. But if that process of discussion, deliberating, deciding what a moratorium looks like and when we implement it is going to be too much of a distraction or take too much attention away from this process, I'm not excited about that. And given that we do have we have 2 members of the commission who are not here tonight, so they can't weigh in. I don't know if they support further exploration of a moratorium or not. Right now, there's not sufficient consensus, in my opinion, for us to further consider and explore a moratorium. Although it sounded like Commissioner Ramsey was kind of open to it. It was evolving.
Things, right? Everything is an opportunity, and something that you just highlighted, Mr. Mayor, very eloquently was that it can be both and. We can still begin working on these ordinances for speeding up the infraction penalization process. Look at that, and how we upgrade code and things like that, while we're still collecting information from our neighbors in Beechwood, Bluffton, and in other neighborhoods that are being heavily affected at 26%. So this can all still happen. We don't have to jump into solving the crisis that is short-term rentals, because it's not that. But we know that there are some things that we can work on pretty easily and address that will make a big impact pretty quickly. So I think that everything you're saying is perfect, but it can be looked at as a both and not just waiting.
Okay. This is both and a moratorium and
No. Like both and like doing the things that we can do now without rushing headfirst into the wall, which we have done before. But we can look at addressing the infraction schedule and the penalization for all of those things, because that has nothing to do with how we respond to the complaints we're getting in these neighborhoods about the oversaturation or possible oversaturation of, please don't come for me, of STRs.
Agree.
Yeah, I don't hate that.
No.
Question for timeline. When it was presented earlier for winter 2024, when policy recommendations and proposals would be come to the commission, what does that look like? You thinking January then? The big start of 2024? Like January, we're going to be having something brought to the commission for initial consideration at a work session?
So I think staff's objective was that prior to the start of the 24 season, that we would have updates in place and clear policy directives that the building department, public safety, planning could all uniformly enforce going forward. So right now, I believe it's May 1st is the registration deadline or
31st
May
is the
31st.
registration, but she did have dates on here to bring the policies to you guys in the fall and then look at putting them in place.
Yeah. Implemented by winter.
Yeah.
Correct.
We're going to be
But
getting something this fall.
bringing them to you in the fall.
Okay. Cool. All right.
Detail oriented. So
That is good to know. All right. Is there any other discussion on this topic or questions? So we're going to be looking to the fall. We're going to be encouraging our community to continue to engage on this, whichever side of the equation they might be on, to help inform the policymaking process. The other thing I just wanted to touch on is also born out of a concern or born out of a recognition of the serious housing situation that we're in. And that is the prospect of where you have a short-term rental operating now and it wishes to operate as a long-term rental. And that presently is my understanding, the practice presently, although I've been told this hasn't always been the practice, but presently the practice is that if you want to go from a short-term rental to a long-term rental, you have to go through the inspection process again, even though the inspections are similar, if not identical, between long-term and short-term. And so if you pass the inspection on a short-term rental, and the first time you got 6 years before you have to re-inspect, but say the second year you want to turn to long-term rental, it's required that you do present practices that you have to go through an inspection again. And so my concern is if we are in a housing shortage, that we should not have impediments or barriers to creation of a long-term housing stock, long-term rental housing stock. And so my thought is that, and our city manager or public safety or inspections can weigh in on this, but my thought is that if you are a short-term rental turning long-term rental, that you, if you're still within that original inspection period, that you're not having to be re-inspected and go through those extra hurdles and costs. So those are my thoughts, but who wants to jump in and correct if I misunderstood anything?
Had these discussions internally. We've thought of some processes that we could do to have like a hybrid for something just like that, I think is what we've been talking.
We could either try to do that right now. The reason why we can't do that is because it's 2 different certificates. So the dates are different. The way that it is written on your certificate is completely different. There would be no way right now to keep track of that date. So if they were a short term and they become a long term, it's a whole new certificate. And if they're not having that inspection to start it, because that's when that date starts, we're not going to know the date that the last inspection was without going through kind of a lengthy process to figure. So we would have to come up with a certificate that would be like a hybrid. Like, so if you registered it at that time, you would have to say, yes, it's going to be a long-term or a short-term versus I'm just going to be a short-term or I'm just going to be a long-term. And that's simply for the dates of the inspection so we can keep track of when they had their inspection. Because our ordinance is written so they either have a 3-year or a 6-year, and if we can't keep track of that date, it's...
Could we, in lieu of creating a third status for the hybrid status, could we just make the current version of SDR the hybrid status, that you have the opportunity, the opportunity to flex, long-term to short-term?
So that would be up to the commission if they wanted to do that. However, with doing that, the numbers wouldn't not necessarily reflect if they are short-term or long-term, and you might run into the issue where people who are currently long-term will then fill out that form, so then our numbers are skewed a little more where we don't know the difference between a short-term and a long-term. So I don't necessarily know if I would recommend that, just for tracking purposes. So we can keep better tracking on our short-terms versus our long-terms. Whereas if they registered it as a hybrid, we could have essentially a third tracking, I guess.
Yeah, so I think that there's validity to that concern, but then, Mr. Mayor, is there just a way for us to have a transitional licensing period or a transitional certificate that says on this date? I mean, if we're talking about, if we're literally talking about tracking a date, I cannot for 1 second believe that we can't wrap our minds around that. But is there a transitional licensure that can go out that says, for the remainder of my time that I was approved, whether it be 3 or 6, as a short term, if the same, and all we have to do is make sure that the inspections then become the same, with, sense, then it just becomes a transitional licensure that they can apply for through application.
It's also billing. So short-term gets billed once a year, where our long-terms are billed monthly, depending on when they apply for their certificate. So the billing is a little different.
Is the cost
also
the same?
No, the cost for a long-term is different than a cost for a short-term. A short-term is $250.
A year. Annually.
Correct.
And a long term is how much a month?
It's $80 a year. No, sorry, excuse me, $100 a year. But depending on when they applied. So if you came in and you applied in January, you're always going to be billed in January. Where our short-term ordinance is written, they are all billed by May 31st.
I understand
the
now.
billing is
Right.
It's
Would also
a little
need to be
different.
revamped is what I'm hearing.
So
All I'm
it's
hearing is opportunity.
a little
Opportunity for improvement.
Yep.
so.
Okay. So,
Yeah, we
yeah,
can.
we can.
you sound
We can figure it out.
Yeah.
just so that staff understands it. We're not just going to find a solution right this moment, but so the staff has understanding where the commission's perspective is.
Yeah.
It's gonna be okay.
Sound like I heard support, but I want to hear from commissioners that we want to
Support.
figure out a way to
Yes.
have that flexibility, so we're not creating impediments
Yes.
to
I learned a
long-term
lot tonight,
rental.
though.
Okay,
I
yeah.
appreciate that.
So there's general support for finding a better way forward.
Always.
Yes,
support a
continuous
better way.
improvement. Whether that's a new hybrid status, changing what the SDR is, provisional, temporary, I don't know. But a desire for a solution is there.
Yes.
Do you have any questions, Mr. Manager?
Nope.
Or want any clarity from the commission?
We're looking for a workaround, which I think we were already on that same page anyways.
Okay.
Or workaround might not be the right word. We're looking for
A
way,
solution?
a solution.
Thank you. Absolutely. Because words matter. Words have weight.
Yes.
Workaround is not what we're doing here.
Okay.
Yes,
Finding
sir.
a solution.
A
My
solution,
apologies.
yes. Yeah, I know we've chatted about this
Yep.
before, but I wanted to bring it to the commission and understand where my fellow commissioners'
Good job.
thoughts are on that. So, all right. Any final thoughts, questions on short-term rentals? Period. No. All right, we're gonna move on to. Oh yes, Mr.
Yo-
Manager.
Well, I just want to thank all the staff that put together this information. Catherine did a great job. Like, she was up here a lot more than I think what we were anticipating, and you guys threw a lot of questions, and she did great. Deborah put a lot of this together. Pete's been in the background. Director Wills has been in the background, working on a lot of this to bring all this together. So there, although you're only seeing a couple of the staff up here tonight, this is really something that we're working across all the divisions on. So I just want to thank them for what they've been doing, and know it's appreciated.
Here. Thank you. All right, that brings us to public comment. Do we have any public comment forms completed?
We do not, Mayor.
All right. Is there anyone in the audience that wishes to give public comment? Mr. Bodman, joining us from the Beechwood Bluffton neighborhood.
Hi, my name's Ed Bodman. Yeah, I'm from the Bluffton area. I want to add a little bit of clarification into what a short-term rental operator.
You have up to 3 minutes to just emphasize, and we got to get the clock up there.
I'll be less than that.
Okay.
I'll be less than that.
I got it.
What a short-term rental operator does here in Muskegon, and this is what I do, and I think others do it this way as well. I'm looking to rent properties as long-term rentals. In May of every year, I make the lease end, and I use it from that period through the summer as a short-term rental because I can generate more revenue and make the place nicer. And then in the fall again, I look to rent it as a long-term rental. That being said, I have a 2-bedroom in Lakeside and a 3-bedroom in Lakeside that's available right now. And if you want to come talk to me, I'd be happy to help you find housing in that way. Now, I think that most people who do short-term rentals do that kind of a thing. Maybe not all, maybe some wait. I do have properties in Bluffton that are year-round, and when I purchased them, they were short-term rentals, and 15 years before, and they still are now. It makes sense to do that. But we do contribute to housing. People who are going through divorces or here temporary on work, most of my houses are occupied throughout the year. So I guess maybe look at it a little bit in that light, because it isn't this on for 2 months and then off for 10 months and somebody should be in there. It doesn't make sense to do it that way as a small business person, and I don't think that anyone's intent is to do that. So, and that being said, one last thing, Commissioner St. Clair, you said something about 25% of the Bluffton Beechwood area are STR. If you go back to what Jake talked about, actually that includes seasonal homes as well. So I think it's probably in the neighborhood of 10% are short-term rentals, and the other 15% are seasonal homes, which is really what that community is really made up of and has been for some time. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Bodman. Appreciate you joining us this evening. Anyone else in the audience? Yes, Miss Larson, joining us from the Nelson neighborhood.
I'll just quick, since I ran over here in my sweats, I might as well speak. But anyway, I do thank the commission for going this route. Let's just get this done. Everything you say is true. All the concerns are true. I started over here being really worried about too many short-term rentals. Now I'm over here seeing the advantages of short-term rentals. There are literally hundreds of businesses that are dependent on these people that are coming in short-term and long-term. And as it was stated, the larger businesses are using, the nurses are dependent on these programs. We've got the construction workers coming in. It's not just a small group of businesses that are dependent on this. Then I'm going to put my resident hat on because because I've also learned that, this definitely has increased the property values, and there are now seniors who are getting a good dollar for these houses, and that is their retirement. These are modest people who have modest homes. They're 100-year-old homes. These short-term rentals are taking these homes that are very difficult to renovate, and they are renovating them. And so now I'm seeing the benefits to our seniors, and it literally just happened to my own mother the past month. She had a home. She's really modest. She was shocked to find out what her home was worth, and she is thrilled that she was able to sell that home and now feels happy that she can live in a senior 2-bedroom, new, with a landlord. And she goes, it's great to have a landlord when you're a senior and you have an old home and you don't have the money to renovate it. This has really been a weird sort of blessing. So I have gone from here to here, and so I just appreciate everybody working so hard on it. I see what's happening here, and let's just move it fast, and like you said, not too fast, but I think we got plenty of time to make it all happen. You guys have done a ton of work, so thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Larson. Appreciate you joining us this evening. Anyone else in the audience wishes? Yes, Ms. Harris.
Yes, I am a short-term rental owner. I do operate. I also have put 2 people in business where right now my cleaner, she employs 7 employees. She started same thing with my long service, but that's a different story. But I'm going to just talk about as a realtor. Short-term folks who are buying these short-term homes, we are not gobbling up the inventory. That is not what we are doing. In Muskegon here in May, the number of homes that were sold in Muskegon were 74 homes. Okay, I'm just talking to Muskegon proper, and that is up from last year. So the average sale price has gone up. I mean, I saw a house that was listed on Albert Street for $180,000, where years ago that house you probably couldn't even breathe to give it away. And now we're selling at premium prices. So, is there a housing shortage? It is, but it's a national thing. It's not just limited to something here in Muskegon. A lot of it has to do with that sellers aren't willing to sell their houses now. Yes, they could get a premium, but where are they going to go? Because their house right now, they're paying an interest rate of probably 2%, and they don't want to pay that extra 7%. So that's why we have a lot of the shortages, because sellers aren't selling those particular houses. Buyers are in abundance. Yes, I understand. It takes a little bit more money. It takes a little bit more effort to purchase a house nowadays. Yes, I have had buyers write offers on houses 4 times, maybe 5 times, maybe because they've gotten outbeat. But if you're working with a good realtor, you're going to walk that buyer through that process, and they're going to find a house at the end of the day. So, the number of houses are still out there. It's just going to take a little bit more time, a little bit more effort. For somebody to sit there and say a house goes on the market and my neighbor couldn't get that house goes up on the MLS, and it's out to everybody. We don't discriminate who happens to come along to buy that house. When I hear these things, oh, well, I couldn't buy that house, or this neighbor couldn't buy that house, or somebody in Muskegon couldn't buy it, that's wrong, because everybody, if they're out there, they want to buy a house, they have the ability to buy that house. And Muskegon is someplace that people are coming to. With my short terms right now, I've got somebody driving all the way up from Texas to stay in my house for 3 days because she heard of a lot of great things that are happening along the beach. And I say thank you to the city for all those things. I thank you for all of the things that the chamber does to encourage people to come to the city. We're changing, and I think what it is that we have to get to that mindset. We're changing. We're going to be a place of a destination, and the housing is going to be available to those people as well. I guarantee.
Thank you for joining us this evening, Brenda. Or Miss Harris. Oh, yes. Miss Lees, joining us from the Beechwood Bluffton neighborhood. Welcome. You have 3 minutes to provide remarks.
Thanks again for the discussion, because it was just really interesting to hear everyone's viewpoints and just to have a good open discussion around it. And I'm not anti-short-term. What I'm really concerned about is the growth. And the data that Safe Built shared, that came from me, that is only Bluffton Beechwood, so I want you to be careful when you looked at those numbers that were shared. That was Bluffton Beechwood area only. And just a couple data points I want to share real quick is that 14 of our last sales, out of them, 10 became short-term rentals. 10 out of 14 became short-term rentals. The other thing in the data there that I looked at, 70% of the 104 homes, properties that I looked at in Bluffton Beechwood, 70% are not residents of Muskegon. There's only 30% who are residents of Muskegon. So just something to think about. Again, it's about the rate, it's about the housing shortage that we need to really think about long-term. My job with General Motors was to be a futurist. I'm programmed to think about, we need to think about the impact of the future.
Thank you, Ms. Leese. Appreciate you joining us this evening and sharing your insights. Is there anyone else in the audience that wishes to give public comment at this time? Yes, Mr. Manager?
So it's not really public comment, but it's about tomorrow's meeting.
Okay.
Yeah.
We do.
Oh,
have-
sorry.
yeah.
Okay.
Who do we have on the line?
We have Brian Clancy.
Hello, Mr. Clancy. I believe joining us from Jackson Hill neighborhood. Last I knew. Maybe you've moved, but welcome, Mr. Clancy. You have up to 3 minutes to provide your remarks.
All right. So I've been listening in, and I've been I guess I'm kind of it's kind of different because I don't understand what the problem is. From what was presented, it doesn't from the data. It doesn't look like it's a problem. We live in a free market, and from a person that's been affected by a free market and being gentrified and understanding how houses and the price of the houses have gone up. I wanted to invest in an ADU unit at my house on Yuba Street because I thought that I keep stressing that Muskegon is a beautiful place to come, and when you keep I feel like as we keep preaching how nice our city is and how beautiful our beach is and how wonderful our people are, we have to have visitors come and enjoy that. And if we don't have these short-term rentals, if we don't have the opportunity for more short-term rentals, then we just look like we closed off. It sounds a little bit more protectionism than it is about the growth. I feel like it's like people are getting mad that they gentrifying the west side. I mean, the west side of Muskegon now. When we've been dealing with in Nelson neighborhood and Jackson Hill where I live, we've been dealing with it forever. But now since we have property in there, and as a minority who owns property, I feel like it should be my right to be able to get into this market and to be able to spread the word about how nice Muskegon is. I love my neighborhood. I tell people all the time that in Jackson Hill we are so chill, and I can see the lake across the street from my house. So I want to share that with people, but it just seemed like I don't understand what the problem is. We want to be progressive, but it feels like we're going backwards, trying to protect what used to be. Look, let the free market speak for itself. I'm sorry, Ms. Gorman, because I might have said some things about you, but I appreciate everything you said because we gotta let the free market go, and we have to. And the barrier of entry to this, I hear people saying we should raise the cost for fines. I mean, not for fines, but for registering short-term rentals. And I think that increases the barrier to entry when we just get to the point where people want to be here, right? So, please think about all of this before we start thinking about putting a moratorium on, what neighborhood can have and what neighborhood can't. Because when you start doing that, you start inequities. So I just don't want this closed-minded stuff to keep going, and I don't like us being territorial. Let's open it up and let people come to Muskegon, and if they buy houses sight unseen, then that means we have value. Let that value ring.
Thank you, Mr. Clancy. Appreciate you phoning in. Anyone else on the line?
No, Mayor.
Anyone else in the audience wishes to give public comment?
Nope.
Happy to speak with you afterwards, though. Mr. Manager.
Yes. So just one note for tomorrow's meeting. There's been a couple tweaks to the agenda. Most of them are minor, but we did add an item for tomorrow about the bike trail movement within Adelaide Point on finalizing the where that new trail will be. So that did get added to the meeting for tomorrow. It is, I believe it was added into the packet. Yep. So, and it includes a map of where the trail currently is and where it would move to, in 2 different colors. So,
in the kidney bean shapes.
no kidney bean shapes. That's all I have.
All right, thank you, Mr. Manager. Any final thoughts or questions? All right.
Motion to adjourn.
Support.
Motion by Commissioner Ramsey, supported by Commissioner St. Clair to adjourn. All in favor, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
All opposed, same sign. The ayes have it. We are adjourned. Thank you. Take care. Be well.